The gods are not only celestial beings that look from the heights, they are immense, incomprehensible forces that mold human destinations with the cruelty and generosity of those who play with fire. In the midst of these powers, a child was born that would be both blessing and tragedy. Hercules, son of Zeus, did not reach the world as a simple man or as a complete god, but as a bridge between them. From the moment he opened his eyes, his life became a show of greatness and pain, a reflection of the eternal struggle between the human and the divine. Imagine a night sky loaded with stars, each as bright as a promise of glory. In this scenario, Zeus, the king of the gods, broke the sacred rules to join Alcmena, a mortal woman. But, as usually happens in myths, there is no light without shade. Hera, Zeus's wife, knew, and her fury soon became a storm that would follow Hercules throughout her existence. Before I could speak, before I could even understand what fear was, his life was already marked by the intrigues of the Olympus. The greatness of Hercules was not given, much less. Since childhood, his life was full of evidence that no child should face. He was barely a baby when Hera sent 2 snakes to the bed where she slept. But what sought to be its end became the first act of its legend. The child, with a force that neither the strongest men could imagine, caught the snakes with their little hands and strangled them without emitting a single cry. It was then that it was clear this would not be an ordinary destination. The Greeks, speaking of Hercules, did not only tell the story of a hero with muscles capable of moving mountains. They saw him as a mirror of themselves, with his virtues and his defects, with his moments of glory and his most painful falls. Hercules was human in his laugh, in his pain and, above all, in his mistakes. That humanity made him close, and his constant struggle to overcome became an inspiring figure. It wasn't perfect, but who is it? His greatness was to get up again and again, even when the weight of his decisions crushed him. The myth of Hercules was not locked at the borders of Greece. He crossed mares, crossed centuries, and became one of the most universal stories ever told. From Rome to the Renaissance, from books to the big screen, his figure resurfaced again and again, adapting to each era without losing his essence. What is this story that makes it so immortal? Perhaps it is the perfect mixture of the epic and the intimate, of the battle against impossible monsters and the internal struggle against the demons themselves. Hercules not only lifted worlds, he faced his. Greek culture understood that their heroes were more than entertainment. They were teachers, guides who showed the road to virtue, even if it was full of thorns. Hercules taught that true heroism is not in easy triumphs, but in accepting the price of sacrifice. What does a man do when life demands everything? For Hercules, the answer was always the same: keep going, even if your life costs you. And in that same question, the shadow of his tragedy extends to what is coming. Because every hero, even the strongest, has a limit. His would not be physical, but emotional, marked by the suffering Hera, his eternal enemy, would sow in his heart. A silent night fell on Thebes, where the shadows mixed with the whisper of the wind. In a palace illuminated by torches, a mortal woman, Alcmena, was immersed in the mystery of love and destiny. Alcmena did not know that that night would be different from any other. It was not a common love that approached her, but Zeus, the king of the gods, who had come down from the Olympus disguised with the appearance of her husband, host. At that time, eternity touched mortality, and from that union a child would arise who would change the course of history. The birth of Hercules was not just any event, it was the result of a divine passion and a predestined tragedy. When Hera, Zeus's wife, learned what had happened, her anger became unstoppable force. Heaven trembled with his screams, and the earth seemed to break under the weight of his resentment. For Hera, the child who was about to be born was not a baby, but an affront, a reminder of Zeus's infidelity. At that moment, he promised that this child would never find peace while she existed. When Alcmena gave birth, there were no signs of calm. Rumors say that the night was filled with inexplicable phenomena. Some said having seen stars move in the sky, as if announced the arrival of someone extraordinary. Others claimed that the air smelled like ozone, as if a ray had left the earth in two. However, within the palace, what was heard was the cry of a newborn, strong and clear, as if not only had he reached the world, but would have conquered him with his first breath. Hera soon made her first movement. he sent 2 huge snakes to the bed where Hercules slept. Any other baby would have been a helpless victim, but not him. With an inhuman force, Hercules caught the snakes with their little hands and strangled them until life abandoned them. The screams awakened everyone at home, and when they arrived in the room, they found the baby playing with the corpses of the snakes as if they were toys. At that time, it was clear that Hercules was not a normal child. It was an omen, a being destined for glory and suffering. The oracle was consulted after this event, and his words left no room for doubt. This child will be the greatest of the heroes, but his life will be marked by pain, loss, and struggle. Alcmena listened to these words with the shrunk heart, fearing for the future of his son, but knowing that fate could not be changed. Hercules, just a baby, was already caught in the game of the gods, a game where the pieces were men and the board, the whole world. As the child grew, his strength and character began to stand out. He moved stones that no adult could move, broke toys just by touching them, and showed an energy that seemed inexhaustible. But this force was not just physical. Since childhood, Hercules showed a deep look, as if he already understood that the path ahead would not be easy. Inside, he carried a mixture of curiosity and melancholy, a duality that would accompany him all his life. Meanwhile, Hera continued to weaving her plans. He could not kill Zeus's son directly, because even she had limits, but she could make her life unbearably difficult. I watched from Olympus, waiting for the right time to sow chaos in the existence of Hercules. For her, this child was not a hero, but an open wound that needed to close at all costs. The birth of Hercules not only marked the beginning of an extraordinary life, but also of an eternal conflict between love and hate, between power and weakness. From the beginning, its existence was surrounded by mystery, danger, and omens that seemed to talk about a destination that could not be avoided. However, although Hera tried to quell the flame of her life, she could not extinguish the spark that made it special. And so, while the child grew in strength and spirit, Olympus and Earth prepared to witness his greatness, and also of his suffering. The night was calm, as if the universe itself would like to keep silent before something happened that would change the course of the story. In a simple cradle, under the dim light of an oil lamp, the baby slept deeply. His breathing was calm, his serene face, but there was something in him that was not common, something that separated him from any other child. Hercules was not an ordinary child. Zeus's blood, the king of the gods, ran through his veins, and that did so much a miracle and an objective. From the moment he was born, his strength was evident. When it was barely an infant, the stories say that it lifted objects that other children could not even move. The peasants of the place spoke quietly, whispering stories about the baby who seemed to have the strength of an adult man. But that same force that aroused admiration also attracted danger. Hera, Zeus's wife, had not forgotten or forgiven. His hatred towards Hercules grew with every day that the child breathed. One night, when the house slept, Hera made her first movement. Without a single noise, he sent 2 giant snakes to the room where Hercules rested. Their bodies slid with a deadly speed, their eyes shone as if the fire of the Olympus itself feed them. His open jaws were a silent threat, a reminder that the gods do not forget or forgive easily. That room, illuminated by the moonlight, became a scenario of life and death. But the baby did not cry. When the snakes approached the crib, they did not find fear. Instead, they found a force they didn't expect. Hercules, with his little hands, caught the snakes around the neck. The animals twisted, struggled to free themselves, but the child did not release them. With a force that no adult could match, strangled them until their bodies were motionless. His parents, aroused by the noise, ran to the room. There they found him, sitting in his crib, with the dead snakes by his side and an expression of innocent triumph on his face. That night he became the first test of what was to come. It was not just a demonstration of strength, but a clear message: the way of Hercules would not be free of dangers, but he was prepared to face them. Rumors about the child spread rapidly. Some called him a miracle, while others saw him as a sign that the gods were playing with mortals. As it grew, its strength only increased. It was not uncommon to see it carrying objects that would require the joint effort of several men. Once, when he was barely 5 years old, a car stuck in the mud near his house. While the adults tried to free him without success, Hercules approached, grabbed the car with both hands, and lifted it as if it were a toy. People looked at him with a mixture of astonishment and fear, unable to understand how someone so young could possess so much. But it wasn't just his strength that made him special. There was something in his gaze, something that was not seen in other children. He had a depth that seemed improper of his age, as if he understood that his life would not be simple. He often sat under the trees, looking at the horizon with a thoughtful expression. No one knew exactly what happened to his mind, but those moments of stillness were a reminder that Hercules was not just a powerful body, it was also a complex soul. Over time, its force became a tool, but also a burden. The other children did not want to play with him, some for envy and others for fear. Even their parents, although they loved him deeply, could not help feeling intimidated by what he represented. Hercules was destined for something bigger than an ordinary life, and that greatness was already beginning to separate him from those around him. However, Hera would not stop. The failure of snakes did nothing more than feed their hatred. I watched from Olympus, looking for new ways to try Hercules, new ways to break it. For her, this child was not just an enemy, it was a threat to the order that struggled so hard. And while the child continued to grow, while his strength and character developed, fate continued to weave his network around him. Because although Hercules still did not know, his life was destined to be a constant proof, a delicate balance between glory and suffering, between the divine and the human. The shadow of what was to come and the horizon began to obscure. In a clear hidden between the mountains, where the wind seemed to carry forgotten secrets, a young Hercules faced a test that he could not overcome with his strength. In front of him was Chiron, the immortal centaur, a teacher whose wisdom was as vast as the starry skies. Hercules, with his body already formed by muscles that seemed chiseled by the gods, breathed with difficulty while trying to control the arch in his hands. His strength was immense, but precision required patience, something that he still should learn. Chiron watched him calmly, his eyes full of an understanding that went beyond the human. He had taught heroes before him, but none as Hercules. There was a fury contained in the young man, an invisible weight that loaded on his shoulders, and Chiron knew that this was his true battle. "It is not the force that dominates the arch," Chiron said with his serious and leisurely voice. "It is calm. If you fight yourself, you will never beat." Hercules frowned, irritated. Since childhood, I had solved everything with brute force. Raising a rock, knocking down a tree, even facing snakes sent by Hera, everything had been a matter of physical power. But here, with the arch in his hands, he understood that he could not win with his muscles. Chiron was not the only teacher who molded Hercules, but was the most important. He taught him that heroism did not consist only of overcoming monsters, but in dominating the inner chaos. Patience, empathy, and control were equally essential as force. Through long training days, Hercules learned to listen to the sound of the forest, to observe the movement of the stars, and to understand that the world was not only something that it should conquer, but something that it had to respect. In addition to the centaur, Hercules had other mentors who added key pieces to their character. Of Autolycus, the master of the art of melee combat, learned that each movement should be calculated. The art of the struggle was not a meaningless force show, it was a dance, a strategy where the mind was guided to the body. Autolycus faced him without mercy, knocking him down again and again, until the young man learned that falling was not a failure, but an opportunity to get up stronger. Delino, his music teacher, discovered one side of himself that he never imagined. Although at first he made fun of the idea of touching the lyre, Hercules soon found a refuge for his restless soul on the strings. Music, they taught him, was a means to balance the spirit, a way to find calm in the middle of the storm. But not all lessons were easy. One day, in an outburst of anger, Hercules hit Lino during an argument, causing his accidental death. This event marked a deep scar in his heart, reminding him that his strength was a gift, but also a dangerous burden if he did not learn to control it. Throughout these years, Hercules' character began to take shape. He was no longer just a young man with an inhuman force, but someone who began to understand the weight of his destiny. Those around him noticed the change. His walk, formerly impulsive, became more reflective. His eyes, before full of a contained rabies, now showed compassion flashes. However, Hero's shadow was still present. Hercules knew it, although he could not see it, he felt it in every decision, in every step he took towards his inevitable greatness. The lessons were not limited to physical or intellectual skills. Hercules also learned about sacrifice. In his training with Chiron, he understood that heroism often involved leaving aside personal well-being for the good of others. Glory taught him it was not the ultimate goal, it was the result of serving a larger purpose than oneself. But in the depths of his being, there was still an internal struggle. His heart charged with the weight of his duality, half mortal, half divine. While the other heroes had a clear sense of who Hercules lived in a constant state of conflict. Was he a man trying to achieve the divine or a god trapped in human fragility? This question tormented, giving strength but also sowing doubts. As the years passed, their body and mind reached a harmony that before seemed impossible. Chiron looked at him one day, after a particularly exhausting training, and nodded approval. You are ready, even if you don't know. But remember, Hercules, there is no more difficult lesson than the one that comes from your own mistakes. The young hero assimilated those words with a mixture of gratitude and concern. Because deep down from his heart, he knew that fate still had many evidence reserved for him. The monsters that it would face would not always be of flesh and blood, some would be the ghosts of their own fears, the echoes of their failures. And so, with each dawn, Hercules continued to train, not only his body, but also his spirit, forging himself to face a destiny that awaited him with open arms and hands full of challenges. The afternoon was dyed from a deep red, as if the sky itself presages a tragedy. Hercules, the hero whose strength seemed not to know limits, was in the courtyard of his home, watching his children play. His laughs echoed as a melody, filling the air of a happiness that he was just beginning to believe deserved. Next to him was Megara, his wife, the woman who had been her refuge in the midst of the storms of her life. For a moment, everything seemed perfect, as if even the gods had decided to give it a truce. But in the Olympus, Hera watched. His hatred towards Hercules had not decreased, and his determination to destroy it remained intact. He had tried to kill him before, first with snakes in his crib and then with obstacles in his youth, but he had always failed. This time, I would not use the brute force, he would use his mind, his cunning. Inside, he decided that if he could not destroy his body, he would destroy his soul. The madness came like a whisper, a shadow that slid inside Hercules' mind without warning. It all started with a concern, a discomfort that could not explain. The laughter of his children, who were previously a balm, became a deafening noise. Megara's family faces and the little ones began to seem strange, even hostile. His hands, the same ones that had raised impossible and strangled Peso's monsters, began to tremble. Something dark grew inside, something that could not control. Hera, from her heavenly throne, smiled to see how her plan took shape. He had sown the seed of madness in his mind, madness that would make him doubt everything he loved, that would push him to the edge of the abyss. One night, while the moon bathed Hercules' home with its silver light, madness reached its climax. In an instant of blindness, of a fury that he did not recognize as his, Hercules turned against those who loved the most. Megara tried to calm him, speak to him, but his words were like a distant echo in his cloudy mind. His children, young and vulnerable, hid behind her, but not even that could stop the chaos that was unleashed. When the dawn finally arrived, the house was silent. Hercules, standing in the middle of the disaster, saw what he had done. His wife, his partner, and his children, the fruits of his love, lay motionless before him. His mind, now free from Hera's influence, was beaten by reality as an all-too unstoppable. The greatest hero in Greece, the man who had faced monsters and gods, had committed the most monstrous act imaginable. The pain was immediate, a weight in his chest that left him breathless. He knelt with his family's bodies, his hands, so accustomed to the fight, trembling when touching them. There was no shout that he could express his guilt, there were not enough tears to wash the blood that now stained his soul. Hera had won, and he knew it. For days, he wandered through the fields near his home, unable to face the eyes of others. The rumors spread rapidly. The great Hercules had fallen, not in combat, but by his own hand. People avoided it, fearing the fury that once had been its greatest virtue. But he didn't look for a company or forgiveness. I was looking for a reason to continue living. Finally, unable to load with his guilt in solitude, he decided to look for answers. He went to the Oracle of Delphi, where the priestesses, guided by Apollo, revealed what he should do. Redemption would not be easy. He had to serve a king, Eurystheus, and carry out 12 impossible works. Only through this suffering he could clean his soul and honor the memory of those he had lost. The words of the oracle did not relieve their pain, but they gave him a purpose. He knew that these works would not only be physical evidence, but challenges that would force him to face the worst of himself. However, I also knew I had no choice. His life no longer belonged to him. It was a sacrifice that I had to offer to repair the damage it had caused. With every step he took towards the beginning of his tests, he felt the weight of his past, a weight that would always follow him. His heart was broken, and his mind, marked by the madness induced by Hera, was now a battlefield where repentance and hope constantly fought. Inside, something changed that fateful night. The force that had always defined Hercules was now insufficient. What he needed to continue was not in his muscles, but in his soul. Because although he had lost everything, even himself, he knew he could still try to be worthy of those he had loved. And thus began his search for redemption, a path full of monsters, gods and, above all, of the shadows he had created. The echo of Hercules' steps resonated in marble corridors, a sound that seemed to weigh more than the same air. Every step he took towards the Oracle of Delphi was a reminder of the abyss in which he was. His heart, broken and stained with guilt, was beating with a force that seemed alien to a man who wanted to almost exist. His mind did not cease to repeat the images of that fateful night, as a punishment that had no end. The sanctuary of the oracle was a sacred place, wrapped in an aura of mystery and power. The flames of the torches illuminated the walls decorated with inscriptions that spoke of gods and destinations, reminding him that even a man of his strength was subject to something much bigger than himself. Upon entering the main chamber, an aroma of incense filled his senses, and in front of him, sitting on the sacred tripod, there was the Pythoness, his eyes closed, waiting for the divine message that would guide the fallen hero. Hercules, with a voice that seemed to break under the weight of his guilt, spoke. He did not apologize or clemency. He knew that such things were not in the hands of the gods. He only asked for an answer, a way to redeem the horror he had committed. The Pythoness, after a long moment of silence, began to speak, her voice echoing as if it came from another world. You must submit to Eurystheus' service, king of Mycenae. He will be the one who dictates the works that will atone for your crime. Only through these tests, which will challenge your body, your mind, and your soul, you will find redemption. Eurystheus' name fell like a blow. Hercules knew the king, a weak and cowardly man who could barely hold his own sword. But the hero did not argue. He knew he was not in a position to question the decree of the gods. He accepted the punishment without a word, tilting his head as a sign of obedience. If the jobs that Eurystheus would impose were the price to wash the blood of their hands, then it would fulfill them, no matter how impossible they seem. The trip to Mycenae was loaded with dark thoughts. Each hill, each river, each tree seemed to whisper the same questions. Would it be enough? Could one day free about your guilt? Upon arriving at the Eurystheus court, the contrast could not be more marked. Hercules, a giant whose presence filled the room, knelt in front of a man whose body and spirit seemed insignificant compared. But that difference of power did not go unnoticed by Eurystheus. I knew the story of Hercules, and instead of admiration, I was afraid. What man could control someone like him? I was simple, the gods. Eurystheus looked at the hero kneeling before him and felt a mixture of satisfaction and fear. Here was the most powerful man in Greece, reduced to a servant by divine will. He decided to use this opportunity not only to humiliate him, but to affirm his own position as king. I'll be imposed 12 jobs, Eurystheus said with a tone that sought to be authoritarian, although he betrayed a slight tremor. Each will be proof of your strength, but also of your obedience. If you fail in any of them, you will not get the redemption you are looking for. Hercules' eye showed no emotion. It was not the place or the moment for pride. He only nodded, accepting the challenge with a resignation that hid the storm inside. He knew that Eurystheus would not seek justice, but the opportunity to humiliate him, to prove that even the strongest can be reduced. The first order came soon. He had to face the Lion of Nemea, a beast whose fur was impenetrable and whose force rivaled that of the same gods. Eurystheus sent him to the challenge in the hope that the hero would not return. But Hercules, although wounded inside, was not someone who went back to danger. While leaving the throne hall, the courtiers of the courtiers followed him. Some pity, others with fear, but none with the courage to speak. Hercules did not blame them. He knew that now a lonely path was walking, one where every step he brought him closer to the abyss or his salvation. The weight of the oracle decree and Eurystheus' orders not only fell on his shoulders, but also on his soul. Because although the works were destined to be a form of redemption, in the deepest what I loved most. And so, with the sound of the doors closing behind him, he began his journey to the first of the works. His body was ready for battle, but his heart still had to face a much more difficult war. Eurystheus was not a man who inspired fear or respect. His figure, con-filled and hunched over, contrasted with the majesty that was expected of a king. However, what lacked strength and courage, compensated it with cunning and a hatred so deep that it consumed each of its decisions. In the background, Eurystheus knew that his crown was a gift from the gods, a divine whim that had put him on the throne of Mycenae instead of Hercules, who, by lineage and merit, was the true heir. That reality burned it as a constant fire. From the moment he knew the existence of Hercules, Eurystheus detected him. It was not just that the hero possessed an inconceivable force, but also his presence eclipsed everything he, as king, represented. Eurystheus was aware that he could not compete with Hercules in terms of power, honor, or glory. The rumors of the exploits of Zeus's son arrived in Mycenae as storms, each more impressive than the previous one. Meanwhile, his own name was barely mentioned outside his court. That constant comparison was filled with resentment, a resentment that soon became hate. When the gods decreed that Hercules should serve him as punishment, Eurystheus could not hide his satisfaction. For the first time, he had the opportunity to submit the man who represented everything he was not. But I also feared it. Because although Hercules had kneeled before him in obedience, Eurystheus knew that the force of the hero remained intact, latent, waiting for the moment when divine control was weakened. That duality, the power to send and the fear of losing it, defined the relationship between them. Every decision that Eurystheus took in his role as the master of Hercules was impregnated with a desire to humiliate him. The 12 works he designed not only sought to test the strength and ingenuity of the hero, they were also a way to exhibit their power over him. By ordering Hercules to face the Lion of Nemea or capture the taureau de Crete, Eurystheus was not only challenging the halflings, but reaffirming himself as the man who had control. However, behind his arrogance and hate, Eurystheus lived in a state of constant paranoia. He saw in each look of Hercules a reminder of his own weakness. Although the hero did not show signs of rebellion, Eurystheus felt that Hercules' force was a volcano that could explode at any time. That insecurity led him to take ridiculous precautions. An underground shelter was built within his palace, a bronze room where he hid every time the hero returned from fulfilling one of his works. From there, he gave orders to his messengers, avoiding facing the man who feared and despised. Eurystheus' hatred was not just personal, it was the reflection of something deeper. It represented human envy in its purest form. Eurystheus hated Hercules not only because of what it was, but because his mere existence exposed the lack of the king. While Hercules struggled to redeem himself, Eurystheus used his power to feed his injured ego. The contrast between the two was evident to all. One was the image of greatness, even in its fall, while the other, despite his position, was nothing more than a small man trapped in his own insecurities. Deep down, Eurystheus knew that his power over Hercules was ephemeral. The works were a way of prolonging his domain, but every success of the hero brought him closer to redemption. Every time Hercules returned triumphantly, Eurystheus' hatred grew, because he could not deny the truth. Although it was his master, it would never be his equal. The courtiers of Mycenae watched this dynamic with a mixture of fear and fascination. They knew that Eurystheus was a weak king, sustained only by the will of the gods, and many suspected that, without that support, his reign would be ephemeral. But they also knew that challenging him meant facing his paranoia, a paranoia that made him dangerous, even for those who served him. Eurystheus, however, did not see the danger in his own acts. In his mind, submitting Hercules was a victory, a way of affirming in front of Olympus, in front of the people and, above all, in front of themselves. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shadow of Hercules growing behind him, like a storm that inevitably approached. That tension, that fear disguised as hate, was the fuel that promoted each of its decisions. And although I would not admit or before himself, Eurystheus knew that he could not escape the shadow of Hercules. Because, in the end, no matter how many works imposed or how many tests would design, the greatness of Hercules would continue to be in truth that no punishment could erase. Alba's first light filtered among the trees, bathing the figure of Hercules with a golden glow. Standing by a river, the hero washed his hands, as if trying to clean not only the dirt on the road, but also the invisible spots of his past. Although his body was that of an imposing warrior, his gaze betrayed a mixture of resignation and determination. He knew that the work that awaited him would not be simple physical challenges, they would be evidence designed to take it to the limit, to forge it in a fire that purified or consumed it. Before undertaking his first work, Hercules prepared not only as a man, but as a semi-awareness that he would face creatures and challenges that challenged deadly logic. The weapons and tools they gathered were not simple objects, each had a story, a connection with the gods, and a purpose that resonated with their destiny. Among his most precious possessions was his arch, a powerful weapon that had been a gift from Apollo. The arrows that carried were not common, many were bathed in the venom of Hydra, a creature that would face later in their second test. This poison was so lethal that even superficial friction could mean instant death. The arch, along with these arrows, would become an extension of its strength, a tool that would allow him to even reach the farthest or fastest enemies. There was also his maza, a brutal weapon that he had carved from the wood of a sacred olive tree. The maza symbolized the pure force of Hercules, its ability to face any adversary with a blow that could bother walls and break bones. I had no ornaments or inscriptions, it was a simple weapon, but in the hands of the hero, it became something fearsome. However, the centerpiece of his team was his armor. Forged by Hephaestus, the god of fire and the blacksmith, this armor was a gift that had received long before the work began. Its brightness reflected sunlight as if it were made of stars, but it wasn't just an aesthetic piece. Each metal plate was designed to resist beasts and creatures' attacks that no ordinary human could withstand. The armor not only protected his body, it was a constant reminder that I was not alone, that the gods still had an interest in their destiny. Despite these tools, Hercules knew that no weapon, however divine, would be enough without proper preparation. He spent days training, not only with his arch and mace, but also with his body and mind. He practiced fast and precise movements, raised impossible stones for others, and ran for hours, preparing his resistance. But beyond the physical, he worked in his approach. I knew that many of the work would require not only strength, but cunning and patience, qualities that it should reinforce. The memories of his childhood and youth with Chiron, the centaur who had been his teacher, returned to his mind during these days of preparation. Chiron had taught him to channel his strength, to use it as a tool instead of letting him control it. He had also instilled the importance of the strategy, reminding him that even the strongest enemy has a weak point. These lessons now resonated more strongly than ever, guiding him as he refined their skills. Hercules understood that his preparations were not just to face beasts or complete impossible tasks. They were also a way of reuniting with the man who had been before Hero-induced madness took everything. Each arrow that placed in his laugh, each adjustment to his armor, every blow he practiced with his mace was an act of reconstruction, an effort to forge again, this time not only as a hero, but as someone worthy of redemption. Before leaving, he also sought spiritual advice and support. He visited temples dedicated to the gods, offering sacrifices and asking for his favor. Although he knew that Hera would be a constant presence, hoping to see him fail, he hoped that other gods, such as Athena and Hermes, would guide him in critical moments. Athena, with his wisdom, represented the balance he needed to keep calm in extreme situations. Hermes, the fast messenger, symbolized mental and physical agility that would be essential in many of the works. Finally, when everything was ready, Hercules took a moment to breathe. With the tight armor, the mace in his hand, and the ark hanging on his back, felt complete, like a warrior who was born to face what was necessary. But within him, a small voice reminded him that no preparation would be enough to erase his past. His true battle would not be against the Lion of Nemea or against the Hydra of Lerna, it would be against the shadow that persecuted him, the shadow of his guilt. With the first commission of Eurystheus in mind, Hercules adjusted his laugh once again and began to walk. Each step approached an uncertain destination, but he also moved him away from the man he had been. His weapon shone in the sun, and his imposing figure seemed that of a god walking between mortals. But inside, I knew he was just a man, full of errors, seeking to redeem himself with each challenge he accepted. The night before undertaking the first of the works, Hercules was alone, surrounded by the shadows that lengthened under the moonlight. His mind kept going around what was coming. He knew that the gods watched him, and although some had condemned him to face the impossible, others, with his wisdom, speed, and skill, they offered him support in his journey. The wind began to whisper among the trees, bringing with them an almost ethereal presence. Hercules looked up and saw, at the top of a nearby hill, a figure illuminated by the moonlight. He was not human, but a goddess, whose glow seemed to invade everything around him. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategy, was before him. The calm of his face radiated serenity, but his eyes showed an intensity that could only come from a being that understood the depths of the human soul. "Hercules," he said with a voice that resonated in his chest, "I know your path is full of shadows. I know what weighs you in your heart and what you are looking for in your soul. You are not the first to fall into the dark, but the first to get up again and again." The goddess extended her hand towards him, and a soft breeze wrapped him, as if a wisdom mantle fell on her shoulders. "I offer my help, not in the form of weapons or magic, but in what you really need, strategy. Each of the work they expect requires more than just force. You need to know how to face them, how to take advantage of the weaknesses of your enemies. Let me guide you in those moments of doubt, and in your mind the answers will be born." Hercules, with the lighter heart for Athena's words, nodded. He felt that with his support, the works would not only become challenges of strength, but also in mental battles, where cunning would be as crucial as the value. With Athena's blessing in his soul, Hercules got more at night, just to find another figure, one that had already been an ally in his youth. The wind brought with it the sound of a message that only the hero could understand. A rapid flash of light illuminated the ground and, before he could react, Hermes, the messenger of the gods, appeared before him. The god of travelers and speed, known for their agility both in body and in mind, smiled out of a mischief as he approached. "Hercules, I see you prepare to face the storm. Sometimes, speed and cunning are better allies than brute force. I will give you something that will be useful more than once on your journey." With a single gesture, Hermes gave him golden sandals, whose brightness almost blinded. They were not Unar's common sandals, but magical, capable of making him move with an unimaginable speed, as if he could run faster than the wind itself. "These sandals will allow you to cross the obstacles with speed. But not only that, they will help you think and act faster at times where despair could blind you. Remember, Hercules, many times the force does not reside only in the muscles, but in the speed with which it acts." The hero accepted the sandals with gratitude, feeling how renewed energy began to run through his veins. Hermes had not only given him an object, but a lesson. Speed was not only physical, but mental. Before the god could disappear as quickly as he had arrived, a last flash of light illuminated the horizon, and one more figure appeared before him. Hercules, looking at the figure of Hephaestus, the god of forge, felt reverence. Although he was not always the most accessible, Hephaestus, in his humility and skill, had been the one who had given him the armor that protected him. Now, at this crucial moment, God seemed to have more to offer. "I know what you face is overwhelming, Hercules," said Hephaestus with a serious and warm voice. "But your armor will not only protect you from physical damage. I have given you something else. It is the representation of your will, a reflection of your ability to mold your destiny. When the battle gets harder, when fear tries to invade you, remember it. true strength is not only in the muscles, but in the heart that beats with determination. The god raised his hammer and hit the air, creating a light of light on the horizon. Suddenly, something in Hercules' armor illuminated, as if he responded to Hephaestus' words. It was a small rune that had been recorded in the shell's chest, a symbol of protection and courage. The rune shone, reminding him that, although the gods offered his help, his greatest strength resided in his indomitable spirit. Hercules felt invincible at that time, as if the power of all the gods had merged into him. But I knew that, although these gifts were invaluable, the road would still be arduous. They were not the weapons, nor the speed, nor the strategy that would lead him to complete the works, but the iron will that burned inside. With the support of Athena, the speed of Hermes and the protection of Hephaestus, Hercules felt that his mission was no longer a punishment, but a trip of redemption in which every step was accompanied by forces much greater than him. Although the gods offered him his gifts, in the end, the true power would reside in the ability to face their own fears and doubts, and move on, step by step, with the strength of their heart. Each of the 12 works of Hercules not only represented a monumental physical challenge, but also a deep proof of his character, his indomitable spirit, and his internal struggle against guilt and despair. These works, imposed by King Eurystheus, were not just punishments, they were disguised opportunities for Hercules to demonstrate his true value, to purify his soul and find the redemption that he longed for. In his fight against mythical creatures, impossible monsters, and superhuman tasks, each work carried with him a symbolic meaning that transcended the physical. The first of the works, the hunt for the Lion of Nemea, was more than a simple battle against a monster, it represented the confrontation with the inner beast itself. The Lion of Nemea, who had an impenetrable skin, symbolized the fears and obstacles that could not be defeated in a traditional way. Hercules, having to use his cunning and strength, not only beat the creature, but found how to adapt and overcome what seemed invincible. The lion was not only defeated, but his skin became an armor that, forever, would remind him of the importance of perseverance. The second work, which involved the Hydra de Lerna, a monstrous snake with multiple heads that regenerated with each cut, reflected the eternal fight against evil. The Hydra symbolized the vices and bad actions that, like the heads of the snake, always emerged again, regardless of how many times they were trying to eradicate them. By winning her, Hercules not only demonstrated her strength, but also her ability to face what seemed impossible to eliminate, learning that some struggles require a different approach, beyond simple brute force. The capture of the Sirenia Cierva, the third work, was not just an exercise of skill. La Cierva, with its golden horns and its supernatural speed, represented ephemeral beauty and unattainable desire. Hunting it did not mean only physical capture, but the understanding that some things are too fleeting to possess them completely, but their persecuting and catching it reflected the human longing to achieve the unattainable, to dominate the indomitable. The fourth work, the capture of Erymanthus' wild boar, was marked by the brutality of the task, but also by the symbolism of facing uncontrolled fury. The wild boar was a force of destruction aimlessly, and catching it was a metaphor of how, in life, we must learn to confront the destructive forces that surround us, whether external or internal, and direct them towards a controlled purpose. The fifth work, the cleanliness of Augeas' stables, seemed the most humble of all tasks, but it was a reflection of the worldly and apparently insurmountable challenges that life presents. Augeas, king of Elis, had stables so dirty that they had not cleaned in years, which symbolized accumulated corruption and arduous work that sometimes demands the purification of what is stuck in moral and physical dirt. Hercules should not only clean, but to transform a disaster into something useful, showing that sometimes the great victories come from dedication to small things. The sixth work, the elimination of the birds of the Stingfall, represented the fight against the invisible enemies and the constant threats that stalk in the shadows, those that we cannot see immediately, but that affect us without rest. Birds, with metal spikes and sharp feathers as spears, were a manifestation of those problems that arise without prior notice, but must be faced with courage and determination, although the methods to do so are not always clear. The capture of the taureau de Crete, in the seventh work, symbolized the confrontation with the indomitable power. The bull, a being of immense strength and fury, represented the struggle to master what it seems out of control. It was a manifestation of the chaos that Hercules had to bring under control, teaching that the force, although necessary, must be guided by wisdom to avoid destruction. The eighth work, The Theft of Diane's Mares, presented the need to overcome barbarism and human madness. The mares, fed by human flesh, symbolized degeneration and loss of morality. To obtain them, Hercules should not only face wild creatures, but also the primitive instincts that lead us to decline. The ninth work, Obtaining the Hippolyta Belt, was a confrontation with female power, a representation of the capacity for control and autonomy. Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons, represented the figure of the strong and powerful woman, but also the conflict between the different powers in the world. Hercules had to navigate in a territory full of conflicts, learning to understand and respect forces that were not always visible to the naked eye. The capture of Gyrian buffalo, in the 10th work, represented the fight against greed and absolute power. Gyrian, with his triple body and his dominance over the buffalo, was a metaphor of excessive control and greed. Hercules, when defeating him and stealing his buffalo, faced not only a monster, but to the need to face what the selfish accumulation of power represents. The 11th work, The Theft of the Apples of the Hesperides, not only focused on force, but also on the search for knowledge and wisdom beyond the mortal. Apples represented prohibited knowledge, something unattainable but fundamental in Hercules' trip. This work symbolized the importance of the insight and help of others, such as the knowledge of Atlas, to achieve what seemed impossible. Finally, the 12th work, The Capture of Cerbero, the guardian dog of the underworld, represented the final confrontation with death, the confrontation with the uncontrollable. Cerbero not only symbolized the inevitable end, but also the ability to face the darkest aspects of oneself without succumbing to them. The 12 works of Hercules, more than simple physical tests, were lessons on human nature, on the virtues and vices we all face. Each task was a reflection of the universal dilemmas of life, where the struggle for redemption is a constant battle, but also an opportunity to grow, learn and, finally, achieve forgiveness. The night fell on the land of Nemea, and the air was loaded with the tension of what was about to happen. Hercules, armed with nothing more than his mace and courage, was before the entrance of the cave where Nemea's lion had made his home. No one had managed to overcome the beast before, because his skin was impenetrable, and his uncontrollable fury. The monster was not just an animal, it was a manifestation of what seems invincible, a challenge that none of the mortals had been able to overcome. The lion of Nemea, with his golden hair like the sun and his eyes like embedded, had terrified the entire region for years. His strength was so great that no weapon, neither spears nor sword, could cross his skin, as hard as steel. He had raised entire herds, destroyed villages, and left in his path a trace of destruction that extended throughout the kingdom. People fled to see him, and the weapons that were once a symbol of hope, now they only served as impotent witnesses of defeat. Hercules, however, was not a common man. It was a demigod, son of Zeus, and the mission that had been entrusted to him was not only a matter of strength, but to face what seemed impossible. He knew that facing Nemea's lion would require more than his mace. He had to find a strategy, something that the others had not seen, something that neither the monster could foresee. He walked to the cave with a firm step, the sound of his sandals echoing on the ground like a war drum. The wind blew gently, and for a moment, it seemed that nature contained the breath. He knew that what he was about to change his life forever. Suddenly, a deafening roar rumbled in the cave. The lion shot like an arrow, his eyes fixed on his prey. The wind rose with its speed, and the earth trembled under its huge legs. Hercules, with his heart beating hard, did not move. I was ready. He had learned that speed and strength were valuable, but patience and cunning were the ones that often defined the result of a battle. The lion threw himself towards him, but Hercules, with his agility and exceptional reflexes, dodged the deadly attack. The lion, furious, began to turn in circles, looking for an opportunity to catch him. Hercules watched each movement, studying the monster as an experienced hunter, seeing how the creature tried to surprise him, but without success. At that time, a brilliant thought crossed his mind. The lion's skin was invulnerable to any weapon, but its strength was not. If the arrows and spears could not cross it, what would it take? Hercules recalled the lessons of his teacher Quiron, who had taught him to see beyond brute force, to seek weakness where there seemed to be none. Nemea's lion, no matter how strong and fierce, was not immortal. I just needed to find the precise moment to act. Taking advantage of a lion's turn, Hercules threw himself into attack with his huge force. Instead of trying to hurt him with his maza, he did what no one had tried: he used his own physical strength to suffocate him. He pounced on the beast and, with a pair of iron hands, wrapped his neck with a huge force. The lion fought with fury, his claws as daggers trying to tear his attacker's flesh, but Hercules did not yield. Sweat fell from his forehead, and his breathing became heavier, but his will was stronger than any pain. The lion, desperate to free himself, roared with unstoppable fury. But Hercules did not stop. Every time the monster tried to free himself, the demigod tightened more. He knew he had to overcome him quickly, before the exhaustion reached him. Time seemed to stagnate, and every second was a fight against death. The beast twisted his body, trying to escape, but Hercules' hands were still an iron prison around his neck. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, Nemean's lion stopped fighting. With a last sigh, the creature fell, defeated. Hercules, exhausted but victorious, moved slowly, looking at the animal he had won with his own strength, without the help of swords or spears, but with pure determination and cunning. Hercules' triumph over the Lion of Nemea was not only a victory over the monster, but a victory over the physical and mental limitations that we impose on ourselves. He had defeated the invincible with something more than muscle. He had used his mind, his calm in the storm, and his courage in front of fear. And, in doing so, he had earned the respect of the gods and men. The skin of the lion, still intact and brilliant, became a symbol of his victory. Hercules used it as a layer, an armor that not only protected it from external threats, but also reminded him of the deepest lesson of all his works, that, in life, which seems unbeatable only is until someone has the courage to face it in the right way. The water of the Pantanos de Lerna reflected a silver moon that seemed to smile at what was about to happen. There, in those dark and muddy waters, the Hydra of Lerna waited, still, like a premonitory shadow. In its underground cave, where the air was dense and heavy, its multiple heads rested, ready to attack, to defend the kingdom of terror that had imposed on the region. The monster was not only feared for its appearance, but for its regenerative power. Every time one of his heads was cut, two more arose instead. No one had managed to overcome it, and the legend of the creature was known by all. The Hydra was the manifestation of eternal evil, of vice that cannot be eradicated, of chaos that multiplies with each control attempt. Hercules, when he arrived at the shores of Lerna, could feel the weight of the task that awaited him. It wasn't just a matter of strength. He knew that facing the Hydra would not be like his battle with the Lion of Nemea, where pure physical strength had been enough for him. The Hydra was a multi-heads creature, each as deadly as the previous one, and its regeneration capacity made any attempt to cut them in vain. Hercules had not only to face the creature, but to find a way to end her once and for all. The monster appeared, peeling his heads from the swamp, as if he were testing the resistance of the halflings. Each of his heads was huge, with bright eyes full of hate and mouths full of sharp teeth, ready to devour. The roar he emitted when he saw Hercules was so strong that he made the ground tremble, and the waters around him rose, as if the earth itself would like to warn him of the danger that was coming. Hercules raised his mace firmly and, with a cry that resonated in the air, threw himself into the attack. He knew that the battle would not be easy, but his determination was stronger than any fear. In the first blow, he cut one of the heads of the Hydra. The monster let out a cry of fury, but instead of dying, two new heads began to sprout, replacing the one that had fallen. Hercules stopped for a moment, contemplating the scene, and his heart sank a little. I knew I could not win in this way, that it was not just a matter of cutting the heads one by one. That was when he saw Iolao, his young nephew and companion, who had arrived to help him. Iolao was agile, fast and cunning, and although he did not possess the superhuman force of Hercules, his mind was equally sharp. Seeing what was happening, Iolao quickly understood what should be done. Rapid, Hercules! Do not let the Hydra have time to regenerate! Iolao shouted, pointing a small corner of the swamp where the water was thickened. With that suggestion, Hercules understood what he should do. While he kept attacking, Iolao hastened to light a torch with strong flames. He quickly approached the fallen heads of the Hydra and, with an agile movement, burned them immediately. The fire, when coming into contact with open wounds, sealed the new heads, preventing the Hydra could regenerate them. With renewed strategy, Hercules cut another of the head of the monster, and this time Iolaus was there, ready to act. The cycle continued. Hercules cut, Iolaus burned. Every time the Hydra lost a head, the beast roars with fury, but, at the same time, I saw how their forces were exhausted. The creature could not regenerate faster than the flames destroyed the heads, and finally, the monster began to show signs of weakness. But the battle was not over yet. Suddenly, in the midst of chaos, Hercules saw something that made time stop. In the shadow of the cave, an even bigger and more terrifying head began to form. The Hydra had an immortal head, which could not be destroyed by fire or swords. Hercules, realizing the magnitude of this challenge, advanced with determination. "I'm not going to let your evil keep stalking this world," he shouted, and with a last effort, he threw himself towards the immortal head. I knew I had to end her once and for all. With all his strength, he squeezed his mace and, in a single blow, shattered his immortal head. The Hydra, finally, collapsed in the swamp, her huge body collapsing under the weight of defeat. When the last head fell and the monster stopped moving, Hercules fell to his knees, exhausted but victorious. The Hydra no longer represented a threat, not only by the force of its blows, but for the strategy he had adopted, and for Iolaus' crucial aid. His help, his fire, had finally allowed him to defeat the creature that seemed invincible. Hercules looked at his nephew with a grateful smile, feeling once again how the company and collaboration were more powerful than the force alone. He knew that sometimes, even the biggest heroes could not face the most imposing challenges without the help of those by his side. The victory over the Hydra de Lerna, although physics, was also a triumph over despair and the concept that some ills cannot be eradicated without a more acute mind than the attacks themselves. Thus, the second work was completed, not only with the strength of the semi-heavy, but with the wisdom and courage of those who dare to face the impossible with him. And as always, Hercules got up, ready for the next challenge, without knowing that each victory would bring him closer to his redemption and the peace he longed for. The cold air of the Erymanto Mountains hit Hercules' face while moving through the dense forest. The snow covered the ground, and the darkness began to fall on the vast extension of the forests, where the creature that had to hunt stalked. Erymanto's wild boar was such a huge and fierce beast that his name caused terror among the inhabitants of the region. He had terrified villages, raised crops, and left a trail of destruction throughout the country. The gross force of the wild boar was immense, and its fangs, sharp as blades, could cross any defense. However, Hercules did not fear. He knew that this was one of the evidence that would allow him to redeem himself, a resistance test, courage and skill. Throughout his life, he had faced impossible creatures and had managed to overcome obstacles that many considered insurmountable. And this wild boar, although fierce, would not be different. He toured the forest with determination, his feet sinking into the fresh snow, the crunch of the frost under his weight echoing the stillness of the landscape. In the distance, he could hear the roar of the beast, a manifestation of pure fury that reverberated in the mountains. The wild boar was close. The emotion of the hunt invaded him, but there was also a deep respect in his heart for the power of the creature. I knew it was not going to be an easy capture. Hercules advanced cautiously, moving between trees and rocks, his senses alert. Suddenly, the silence of the night was interrupted by a deafening crash. The wild boar, with his massive body and his glowing fangs, appeared from the trees, ramming with the fury of a storm. His eyes, full of anger, noticed the half Wednesday, and the ground trembled under his legs while carrying him with speed and violence. Hercules did not go back a step. With a surprising speed for someone of their size, he threw himself towards the wild boar, dodging the wild embesses of the creature. Each of the wild boar movements was a reminder of what was at stake, its brutal force, its animal power. The wild boar crashed into a tree, making it creak and fall, but Hercules was already there, with his look at his goal. He knew that, to submit to such a creature, he could not depend only on his strength. The wild boar rammed once again, but this time Hercules dodged it, using his agility to move through the trees. The strategy was not only to overcome the beast with blows, but to corner it, make it tired, force it to surrender. While the wild boar tried to hit him with his fangs, Hercules took every opportunity to maneuver, pushing the creature more and more towards an open land where he could use his cunning. At first, the creature did not understand. He was still ramming with blind fury, but as time passed and the onslaught became more erratic, the wild boar began to stir, exhausted by the effort. It was then that Hercules saw the opportunity. With a fierce shout, he jumped over the beast, surrounding his body with force and determination. The wild boar, exhausted and weakened, tried to free himself, but Hercules' strength was enough to subdue it. The capture of Erymanto wild boar was not a deadly blow, but a capture that required control, cunning and resistance. But when I thought the task was almost fulfilled, something unexpected happened. At the end of the day, when the night already covered the landscape and the air cooled even more, Hercules, with the wild boar, found face to face with the centaurs. The centaurs were powerful and proud creatures, half man, half horse, known for their unpredictable temperament and their love for the fight. But they also had an ancestral wisdom, and their presence was not always hostile. However, at that time, the centaurs that Hercules found did not seem friendly. Jabali's capture had caused agitation in its territory, and its reaction was swift. The leader of the centaurs, a being of great stature and strength, approached Hercules with a firm step. The air tension was palpable. "What have you done, son of Zeus?" he asked in a low voice, but full of fury. "This wild boar is a danger to our land, but now you have altered the balance of nature with your hunt." Hercules, exhausted but serene, did not hesitate. "I have fulfilled what has been ordered," he replied. "The wild boar should be arrested, and my mission is redemption." The centaurs, although warriors by nature, understood the nobility of their words, but also the danger that a creature like wild boar could bring to their home. After a tense moment of silence, the leader of the centaurs, looking at the fallen wild boar and then to Hercules, nodded. "You have our acceptance, semi or covered," he said finally. "But you should know what, and the fight never ends, and there will always be an upcoming test to overcome." With that approval, Hercules continued on his way. The encounter with the centaurs taught him that, even in the heart of a fierce hunt, respect for nature and his creatures is essential. Not all battles are won alone, but with the wisdom of recognizing the place of everything in the vast cycle of life. With the caps captured, Hercules returned victorious, but with a more learned lesson that hunting and fighting are always only part of the equation. The real challenge is to find the balance between action and respect, strength and wisdom. The sun was already beginning to decline on the horizon when Hercules reached the boundary of the Cyrinea forest, where the sacred deer of Artemis had been last seen. It was a creature of unparalleled beauty, with golden fur like the sun and silver antlers that shone with the moonlight. The deer was not just an animal, it was a symbol of the goddess Artemis, the hunter, and her capture would be more than a simple job for Hercules. It was a mission that tested his patience, his skill and respect for the gods. Cyrinea's deer was not an ordinary being. From the first moment Hercules saw her, he knew that it was not only a common hunt. The creature moved with an agility that seemed to challenge the severity itself, jumping from one place to another with a speed that left behind any attempt to follow it. Not only was it fast, but his connection with Artemis made it practically untouchable for any mortal. Capture it would not be just a matter of running after it, he needed to find a way to reach his incredible speed and, even more, win the favor of the goddess to get capture. During the first days, Hercules followed her tirelessly, watching how the deer disappeared between the trees and then reappeared at an even greater distance. With each attempt, she vanished as a golden flash in the air, always one step forward. It was as if the deer itself was a manifestation of freedom and purity, running without fear or obstacles, mocking any attempt to catch it. But Hercules did not give up. He knew that his mission was not only a matter of capturing the creature, but of demonstrating his resistance and respect for nature. As the days and weeks passed, the persecution became increasingly exhausting. The sun became its enemy, the heat of the days joined fatigue, and the earth became increasingly difficult to travel. However, something within Hercules kept him underway, his conviction that each test, each challenge, brought him closer to redemption. The months passed and the persecution became an obsession. Hercules not only ran after the deer, their steps were synchronized with the land beat itself, moving with almost supernatural precision, as if it no longer depended on brute force, but on patience and perseverance. I knew that, to succeed, I had to understand the Cierva, not simply capture her by force. He couldn't get carried away just by the desire to win, he had to find the balance between respect and control. One day, when the account of time had already been lost, Hercules found himself once again in front of the deer, which this time stopped on the edge of a clear. His eyes shone like stars, and his breath, light and fleeting, mixed with the wind. It was the opportunity he had been waiting for, but also the moment when the connection with Artemis should be more than a simple hunt. It should be an act of understanding. With an accelerated heart, Hercules took a step towards her, and for a moment, everything stopped. There was no hurry, there was no need to run. The deer observed it with absolute serenity, as if he understood that, in his heart, there was no desire to harm him, but only the need to complete what had been entrusted to him. With a calm and skill that only a true hunter could have, Hercules extended his hands gently, and with a single precise movement, managed to catch the deer, without causing harm. However, in doing so, something unexpected happened. The wind stirred strongly, and a divine presence filled the air. Artemisa, the goddess of hunting, appeared before him, her serene but firm face, her gaze full of a mixture of fury and admiration. He had witnessed all the persecution, observing every step of Hercules, knowing that only a true hunter could have achieved the impossible. "You have achieved what few could, son of Zeus," Artemisa said in a voice that seemed to melt with the wind. "But don't forget that this Cierva is not just a hunting trophy. It is a symbol of purity and freedom. If you had damaged it, you would have offended nature itself." Hercules, recognizing the seriousness of his words, knelt before the goddess. "I have not come here for the trophy, but to complete a task that has been entrusted to me. My respect for nature is deep, and my intention was never hurting the deer." Artemisa looked at him silent for a moment, evaluating his words. Finally, he nodded calmly. "You have demonstrated something more important than strength, Hercules. You have demonstrated patience, understanding, and respect. I let you take to the deer, but remember that each challenge has its price, and that every victory, however great, is just one step more towards what really matters." With those words, the goddess vanished in the air, leaving Hercules with the deer in her hands. That moment was a reflection of the most important lesson of all his works, that true hunt does not consist only of capturing, but to understand, to respect the world around us, and to learn to balance force with wisdom. Hercules returned with La Cierva, knowing that he had achieved something much bigger than a simple victory. He had shown that, even in the midst of the most difficult tasks, true value lies in the ability to adapt, learn and, above all, to respect what the world offers us. The sound of the wind cut the air on the remote shores of the Estinfalo Lake, where the sun could barely cross the thick clouds that hidden over the landscape. The region was desolate and dangerous, a place of shadow and mystery, known by few and feared by all. The birds did not face melee, they attacked from the air, with a terrifying speed and a destructive power that seemed invincible. The metallic noise of the beating of wings broke the silence of the morning. The birds emerged from the lake, covering the sky with a multitude of shadows. His sharp peaks and his metal feathers shone to the sun, creating a stamp so terrifying that anyone would have felt helpless before such monstrosity. Hercules observed the winged army with a mixture of admiration and respect. "It wasn't just a matter of facing them directly, I would need more than just your strength. I would need cunning and skill." The wind began to blow with more force, and the birds began to be diverse towards him, like arrows that cut the air. Its song, a metallic and strident noise, filled the atmosphere, and each attack was a lethal threat. Hercules, however, was not intimidated. He knew that, although the birds were imposing, their number and their attacks could be overcome with a good strategy. But the challenge was even bigger than it seemed. Every time he tried to use his bow or his mace, birds dispersed rapidly, like shadows in the wind. Hercules, although skilled with weapons, could not hit them due to the speed with which they moved. Then, he realized that he should change focus. The birds were fast, but not invulnerable. He toured the land in search of something that could give him an advantage. It was then that he remembered an old story he had heard from his Chiron mentor. He talked about such a powerful and thunderous sound that he could make the birds stop, even if only for a moment. In the same story, a god was mentioned who had used an instrument to scare away birds in the past. Hercules, without wasting time, decided to look for something that could replicate that sound. After a search that seemed endless, he found what he needed, a huge bronze laugh, forgotten by former hunters. He knew that the power of sound could be his only way out. He grabbed the instrument firmly and, without thinking more, began to blow with all his might. The rumble of sound was immediate. The bronze vibration reverberated in the air, like a thunder that cut the still landscape. The birds, hearing the rumble, began to disoriented. The noise was so sharp, so strong, that some of the birds, unable to support it, stopped in full flight. It was his time. Hercules, without losing a second, raised his arch and shot. Each arrow, launched with the precision that only a half-wedbing could have, demolished one of the fallen birds. The chaos that unleashed was indescribable. Some birds, scared by the deafening sound, began to flee to the lake, while others tried to continue attacking. But the sound did not stop. Hercules blew strongly, maintaining the rhythm of sound that disoriented creatures. Every time one of them approached, his shot was accurate. A couple more arrows, and birds began to fall after another, defeated by the combination of cunning and power that Hercules had used. In the middle of the frenzy, the last one of the birds threw himself into a suicide attack, but Hercules, already tired but determined, let out a last breath of the bronze and fired his arrow with such precision that the creature fell at his feet. He had understood that force was not always the answer. Sometimes, ingenuity could be much more valuable. At the end of the day, when the stillness returned around the Estenephalo, Hercules stared at the lake, reflecting on what happened. He would not always have the advantage of force, and not all enemies would be defeated with a single blow. But he had learned a crucial lesson in that fifth work: cunning, ingenuity and respect for resources sometimes exceed any challenge that one opposes. With the last echo of bronze echoing in his ears, Hercules began his return, knowing that the next work would take him further, to other challenges that would try everything he had learned. And with each step, he approached his destiny more. The task entrusted to Hercules in the sixth work seemed, at first glance, almost insulting. Clean the Auge's stables. It was not a fierce battle or a dangerous hunt. He did not face mythical monsters or creatures, but a worldly, apparently unimportant task. The stables, in which Augeas, the king of Elyde, maintained thousands of oxen, were stuck for years of dirt, manure accumulated to the point that the air was dense and nauseabundo. The challenge was monumental, cleaning such a disaster in a single day. A humiliating task for any hero. Hercules, however, was not a man who let himself be intimidated by the magnitude of a job. Knowing the reputation of Augeas and the king's arrogance, he did not hesitate for a moment to accept the challenge. But as he approached the stables, a cloud of dust and bad smell hit him on the face. The place was so vast that the mountains of manure seemed imposing, and the work seemed even more impossible than he had imagined. Augeas, on the other hand, watched from a distance with a mocking smile on the face. He knew that this task was unreal, that Hercules could not fulfill it in the stipulated time. For him, this mission was nothing more than a way to humiliate the demigod. If Hercules failed, the victory would be of Augeas. Despite the mockery, Hercules did not get carried away by anger or disdain. In his mind, he had already begun to draw a plan. I knew that the only way to meet the challenge was not to try to clean the stable with a shovel or rake, like any mortal would. He needed more than physical effort, he needed the strength of nature itself to help him overcome the immense task. Then, without wasting more time, Hercules went to the Alfeo and Penio rivers. Both rivers were known for their inexhaustible flow, and through them, Hercules knew that he could find the solution. The strategy he devised was simple but brilliant, diverting the course of the two rivers towards the stables. If you managed to flow the water from these rivers through the stable, the current would drag the manure with such force that everything would be clean in a matter of hours. The work that had begun as a ridiculous task now became an engineering and skill challenge. Hercules went first to the Alfeo River, taking a tortuous road through the mountains. The river was powerful, but he knew how to channel his strength. Using its enormous physical strength and intelligence, it began to build a system of channels that would carry the river water to the stables. Each movement was calculated, each essential step to ensure that the flow of water was adequate. The noise of the water in the channel resonated while the river began to flow towards the stable. The water dragged the first layers of manure, but there was still much to do. However, Hercules did not stop. He continued with his homework, diverting the course of the Penio River to the same place. With a meticulous work, the flow of both rivers crossed within the stables, creating a sea-powerful oriente that dragged everything in its path. The scene was impressive. The water, murky and powerful, dragged large amounts of manure, taking everything in its channel. The work that seemed impossible was being carried out at a pace that surprised everyone. The oxen, who had been trapped in that place of dirt for years, now walking easily through the clean stables, as if the air were fresher suddenly. In a few hours, the stables were completely clean, cleaner than anyone had imagined. When Augeas approached to check the work, his face went from surprise to astonishment. He could not believe that Hercules, in a single day, would have achieved what had been considered an impossible task. The king, humiliated, realized that his challenge had been the first to underestimate him. However, what Augeas did not expect was that Hercules not only fulfilled his part, but that he did so to surprise even the gods. Although the task had been completed, Hercules did not forget the arrogance of Augeas. The king had promised to reward him with a part of his vast kingdoms, but when the time came, he refused to fulfill his word. The treatment was clear, but Augeas, blinded by his pride and greed, tried to deceive the hero. However, Hercules was not caught by the king's falsehood. Although he had completed the task without difficulty, the promise of Augeas was not fulfilled. Then, Hercules, as was his custom, decided to act to do justice in another way, showing once again that not only his strength and skills could change fate, but also their ability to face injustice with determination. Augeas' stables were not only cleaned in one day, they became the reflection of the resolution of Hercules, which exceeded what seemed like a simple challenge with a brilliant solution. For the hero, it was not enough to simply fulfill the task, he had to do it so that no one could doubt his power and cunning. And, in the end, everyone was reminded that great evidence does not always require only strength, but also the ability to think beyond the obvious, using everything that is available, even the strength of the rivers. As Hercules advanced in his 12 works, facing monsters, gods, and almost impossible challenges, something deeper was gestured inside. Each task not only represented a physical challenge or a battle against a fearsome beast, but also became a mirror that reflected its own internal demons, arrogance, pride, and guilt. These works, which at first seemed simple tests of strength, became internal battles that led him to face himself. The first of the works, the capture of the Lion of Nemea, was the beginning of a path marked by its own ego. Hercules, confident in his huge strength, thought he could defeat the monstrous lion in the same way that he had defeated other enemies in the past. However, he found a bigger challenge than his own strength. The lion could not be defeated with brute force. It was then that Hercules had to confront his pride, his belief that only his physical power would be enough to overcome any obstacle. It was a moment of humility for him, the moment he learned that not everything in life can be resolved with only force, intelligence and strategy were equally necessary. The same reflection was repeated in the second work, the fight against the Hydra of Lerna. The more heads cut Hercules, the more they arose, multiplying as an endless echo of their own internal struggle. The Hydra, with her heads that were regenerated, represented the fault that harassed him. Every time he thought he had eliminated a demon, another arose instead, reminding him of his past, the mistakes he had made under the influence of madness induced by Hera. It was not only a physical battle, but a war with its own regrets, the feeling that it could never completely free itself from the shadow of its bad actions. And as the works advanced, Hercules also faced his arrogance. The challenge of Augeas' stable, for example, was a humiliation disguised as a simple task. At first, Augeas thought that Hercules would fail, that he could not complete the task of cleaning his dirty stables. However, when achieving it with an unexpected cunning, Hercules showed that he not only had strength, but also the ability to think beyond what others expected of him. And yet, it was the arrogance of Augeas that led him not to recognize Hercules' effort, refusing to fulfill his promise. Hercules, facing this injustice, recalled that true victory is not only to exceed external challenges, but also in maintaining dignity when the world tries to take what corresponds to you. In each of the works, the hero was forced to face his own pride and recognize that he was not invulnerable. Although his strength and skills were exceptional, each task showed him that it was necessary more than only power to achieve true greatness. His fight against arrogance began to take shape at the time he understood that he could not always do everything for himself, which sometimes would need the help of the gods or other beings. The deepest of his inner conflict, however, was revealed in his confrontation with guilt. The madness induced by Hera had led him to commit the worst of the crimes, the murder of his wife and children. This guilt accompanied him as a shadow during each of the works, as a constant reminder of his sin. Despite the efforts to be redeemed, the fault never disappeared completely. Each victory, every success in his works, was like a small truce in the internal war that fought with his own past. Although the evidence brought him closer to redemption, he could never completely free himself from that weight. At the end of his 12 works, when the feat seems to have come to an end, Hercules realizes that true victory is not measured only by what one has done, but for what he has learned about himself. Each defeated monster, each task fulfilled, not only transformed it into a larger hero, but a wisest man. The fight was not only against mythological monsters, but against their own nature, its human defects that made it vulnerable. The lesson, perhaps, is that each of us faces these works of Hercules in our own lives. We find monsters that challenge us, with obstacles that seem impossible to overcome, and sometimes, the greatest battle is against ourselves, our pride, our faults, our weaknesses. The history of Hercules not only speaks of a man capable of performing extraordinary feats, but of a human being who learns, through his pain and sacrifice, that true heroism is not measured by force, but by the ability to confront and overcome the interior demons. From the moment of his birth, Hera, the queen of the gods, became the constant shadow of Hercules. There was no task, there was no time for his life in which Hera's presence did not feel relentless and cruel. His jealousy towards Alcmena, Hercules' mother, and the fury she felt for the illegitimate son of her husband Zeus, indelibly marked the life of the hero. But what seemed to be a simple rivalry between gods soon became a destructive force, which not only tried to stop Hercules, but to mold it, challenged him, and in his own way, he forged him in something bigger. Hera's interference was so constant that, sometimes, it seemed that the hero could not take a single step without her being there, pushing him towards new challenges or poisoning his mind with destructive thoughts. The curse he launched on Hercules, plunging him into madness and leading him to commit the heinous murder of his wife and children, was only the beginning of a series of evidence designed to destroy it. It was not just a desire for revenge. Hera wanted to see Hercules fall. She wanted to show that no son of Zeus, however divine, could escape her hatred. But what Hera did not understand was that every attempt to destroy Hercules only strengthened him. Every blow that gave him in the form of suffering, every challenge to which he subjected him, actually prepared him to be more resistant. Hercules' resistance to the cruelty of the gods, especially Hera, became the true core of his strength. While Hera tried to break him, what he was achieving was to forge an unwavering character, an iron will that drove him to move forward, regardless of obstacles. In each of the works that Hera influenced, the hero not only faced supernatural monsters and creatures, he was also facing the resentment and fury of a goddess who not only wanted evil, but saw him as a reminder of his own inability to control everything that happened in the world of mortals. But the symbolism of Hercules' resistance to these attacks became increasingly clear. It was not only his physical strength that kept him standing, but his ability to resist pain, suffering, and despair. The fate of Hercules was sealed by Hera's actions, and although his life was marked by his hatred, he also witnessed his own evolution. At the same time that Hera tried to destroy it, Hercules was building something much more important, her ability to face adversity, not only on the outside, but also inside. Every time one of his evidence seemed insurmountable, every time he thought that everything Istaba lost, Hera reminded him that his destiny was intertwined with his, but he, beyond pain, continued advancing. Thus, the figure of Hera in mythology not only represents the figure of the enemy par excellence of Hercules, but also a reflection of the greatest obstacle that the hero would have to face, the external and internal forces that would constantly try to tear it down. And in that contrast, in that constant struggle, Hercules showed that true heroism not only lies in overcoming monsters or gods, but also in resistance to adversity, in the ability to move forward even when everything seems lost. Hera's intervention, despite her malevolence, plays a crucial role in the transformation of Hercules. At first, he was a divine but imperfect being, impulsive and full of anger. The goddess, with her hatred, pushed him towards a life of suffering, but also prepared him to be the hero that the world would remember. Every time Hera attacked him, every time he tried to bend it, Hercules not only resisted, but rose above the tyranny of the goddess. Hera, in her resentment, had thought she would destroy Hercules. What had not planned was that each attack would make it stronger, more determined and, above all, more human. Every time he was stripped of a part of his dignity, he recovered a greater understanding of himself. The story of Hercules is not only that of a hero who overcame monsters, but that of a man who fought with his own humanity, who learned to accept his defects and face adversities with unstoppable courage. Hera's constant interference, then, rather than a series of failed attempts to destroy it, became the engine that drove Hercules to become an eternal figure, a symbol of resistance against all kinds of adversity, whether internal or external. Hera thought she could defeat him. But in his attempt to break the demigod, he only strengthened the resistance that Hercules would make an immortal hero. Eurystheus, the king of Tirinto, was a man marked by a deep insecurity that was hidden under a facade of power and authority. Although he ruled a kingdom, his power was actually fragile, easily disturbed by the presence of Hercules. From the moment the semi-heavy was destined to serve him, Eurystheus was shown as a weak figure, trapped between the fear of the greatness of Hercules and the need to maintain his own domain, even if it was through abuse and humiliation. Each success of Hercules was stab in his ego. The king, unable to handle the fact that a younger, stronger, and more brave man was under his command, reacted with a mixture of jealousy and fear that exaggerated the evidence imposed on the hero. But what seemed like a way to punish him actually revealed the cracks in the image that Eurystheus had of himself. Each victory of Hercules not only evidenced the superiority of the demigod, but also reminded Eurystheus of his own cowardice, his inability to highlight in the way Hercules did. The king was not a leader who inspired respect, but someone who clung to power with nails and teeth, fearful of losing it. Therefore, every time Hercules successfully completed a task, Eurystheus twisted frustration. The feat of Hercules not only highlighted his own inefficiency, but also plunged him into an irrational fury. Instead of recognizing the value of the hero and his incomparable skill, Eurystheus felt even smaller, fearful that the he could one day snatch his throne. Eurystheus' reactions to Hercules' achievements were excessive and even comic in their despair for denying them. When the hero fulfilled the first work, the hunt for the Lion of Nemea, Eurystheus not only felt threatened by the force of Hercules, but felt unable to handle the greatness of that being who had defeated a beast that even the gods they feared. Instead of congratulating him, what he did was establish even more difficult tasks, hoping that some monster or challenge could finally defeat the half-lings. But Eurystheus' reaction was not only for fear, it was also a sample of his cowardice. The king feared the success of Hercules because, in his heart, he knew he was a man without the strength or virtue to compare with him. The worst of all was that Eurystheus not only thought about his own fear of Hercules, but he was also determined to make his life impossible, humiling it constantly. The king wanted Hercules' victories not to be held as the triumphs that were really, but as simple victories that did not reflect any merit of the hero. Each success of Hercules was not only seen as a threat to its own power, but as a constant reminder of its own mediocrity. A clear example of this cowardice was seen when Hercules managed to clean Augeas' stables, a job that seemed almost impossible. Instead of recognizing the cunning and effort of the demigod, Eurystheus, in his paranoia, tried to disqualify the task, claiming that it was not a true feat because Hercules had used the Alpheos and Penio rivers to get rid of the manure, subtracting importance to work and focusing solely on what I could control, the disdain towards the successes of Hercules. This attitude of disqualification was not only an attempt to strip the hero of his merit, but also a reflection of the deep fear of Eurystheus towards the power of Hercules. Each victory was a direct threat to his kingdom and his ego, and the only way the king could handle him was to ignore or minimize those triumphs. The exaggerated Eurystheus reaction to each success of Hercules not only demonstrated its cowardice, but also its total inability to understand what the power really meant. While Hercules faced monsters, obstacles, and challenges with honor and courage, Eurystheus hid behind his title, governing with fear and arrogance, unable to deal with the fact that he was nothing more than a common man, without the strength or courage for mature semi-server. Each victory of Hercules only exposed Eurystheus' fragility, a king who could only sustain his power through fear and humiliation, and who, far from being a true leader, was only a reflection of human cowardice. Therefore, the works of Hercules were not only a series of heroic feats, but also a constant exposure of the weakness of its oppressor. Eurystheus, trying to subjugate Hercules, was only weaker in everyone's eyes. His lack of wisdom, his deep fear and arrogance were the true defeat he suffered throughout the works, because every time he tried to stop the semi-heat, he only raised it more, letting himself catch in his own game of insecurities. While Hercules demonstrated what meant being a hero, Eurystheus revealed what happened when power was based on fear and cowardice. Throughout the history of mankind, cultures have created stories that tell us of heroes capable of performing extraordinary feats, facing monsters, and overcoming apparently impossible challenges. Despite the differences in contexts and beliefs, the myths of heroes who undertake epic works share a similar structure, marked by the fight against evil, learning, and transcendence. Hercules, with his 12 works, is not unique in this type of stories. Heroes of other traditions must also face hard and monstrous evidence to achieve glory and redemption. Notable examples of these heroes are Gilgamesh, Rama, and Sigfrido, who, although they come from different cultures, show a clear parallel with the Greek semi-war. Gilgamesh, Sumerians' epic. One of the oldest heroes that can be compared to Hercules is Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, of the former Sumeria. The Gilgamesh epic tells the exploits of a human half and half divine king, who embarks on a long journey to find immortality, after the death of his friend Enkidu. Although it does not have a fixed set of works such as Hercules, Gilgamesh performs a series of tasks that test both physically and spiritually. Among his most prominent exploits is the fight against Humbaba, the terrible guardian of the Cedros forest, who represents a threat to humanity. Like the Lion of Nemea de Hercules, Humbaba is a formidable monster, and the battle with him demands not only strength, but cunning and value. Another of Gilgamesh's great challenges is the confrontation with the heavenly bull, sent by the goddess Ishtar, who falls in love with him and seeks revenge when his love is rejected. This confrontation reminds Hercules' works, as the hero must face an apparently unstoppable force. As in the struggle with the Lion of Nemea, Gilgamesh's victory is not only the triumph of brute force, but also of will and determination, something that connects it with the ideals of heroism present in Greek mythology. Rama, the Hindu prince in Hindu mythology, Prince Rama, one of the most revered heroes in the Ramayana, faces a series of challenges that remind Hercules' works. Rama is a virtuous prince who is forced to undertake an arduous mission to rescue his wife Sita, who has been kidnapped by the Ravan demon. On the way to its goal, Rama faces physical and spiritual evidence that transforms him from an ideal prince to a perfect warrior, capable of restoring order in the world. One of the most representative works of Rama is the demolition of Ravana's enormous strength, a place full of traps and monsters. Like Hercules must face creatures mythological, Rama must fight against demons and supernatural beings who get in their way. Rama also has to fulfill tasks that include the use of its great arch to tear obstacles, similar to how Hercules uses its mythical weapons. However, unlike Hercules, who faces monsters as a form of personal redemption, Ram evil. Sigfrido, the Germanic hero. The figure of Sigfrido, or Siegfried, in Germanic mythology also shows parallels with Hercules. In the Poetic Edda, and other Germanic sagas, Sigfrido is a hero known by his strength and courage. One of his most famous achievements is Fafnir's defeat, a dragon that keeps an immense treasure. This battle remembers the first work of Hercules, in which it fights against the Lion of Nemea, as both creatures are invulnerable, which forces the heroes to use intelligence and cunning beyond pure brute force. In addition, Sigfrido carries out a series of exploits to gain honor and recognition, similar to the evidence imposed by Eurystheus to Hercules. As part of his trip, Sigfrido must also face monstrous beings, perform apparently impossible jobs, and overcome obstacles that require both physical skill and moral resistance. Throughout the saga, Siegfriedo demonstrates the same perseverance and inner strength that characterizes Hercules, becoming the prototype of the Germanic hero that, like the Greek half or wire, struggles to achieve a greater destiny. Universal parallels. Although Gilgamesh's stories, Rama, and Siegfriedo come from very different cultures and traditions, their works and challenges share common elements that are fundamental for the concept of the hero in the mythologies of the world. As Hercules, these heroes should not only face supernatural monsters and beings, but also their tests are also a form of purification and self-discovery. Each of them faces obstacles that lead them to question their destiny, their humanity, and their relationship with the divine. In addition, as in Greek mythology, the trip of these heroes is, in many cases, a metaphor of the internal struggle we all face. While Gilgamesh seeks immortality, Rama struggles for the order of the universe, and Siegfriedo for honor. All face a series of evidence that symbolizes their internal battles with fear, ego, and morality. In the end, as Hercules, each of these heroes not only demonstrates their ability to overcome physical obstacles, but also to deal with their own imperfections and limitations. These comparisons not only show the universality of the hero's myth, but also how cultures, regardless of their differences, have created stories that try to make sense of the human condition through figures that must face the impossible, always looking for something beyond themselves. Whether in Mesopotamia, India, or Northern Europe, the works of the heroes remain a powerful reflection on the individual's struggle against the divine, the monstrous, and the internal. The scorching sun bathed the lands of Crete when Hercules arrived to face his seventh work, capture the legendary Taureau de Crete. This creature was not an ordinary bull. His lineage was imbued with the divine, an offering that Poseidon had made to King Minos, a gift that should have been sacrificed in honor of the god of the sea. However, greed and human pride intervened, and Minos decided to keep the magnificent animal, replacing it with another less imposing. Poseidon's fury did not wait. He transformed the bull into an indomitable beast, a being of strength and ferocity that began to devastate the island. The fame of the Crete bull resonated throughout the region, burning eyes like fire, horns that seemed chiseled in stone, and a force that made the earth tremble in its path. The beast became the terror of shepherds and villagers, sweeping fields and unleashing chaos in every corner of Crete. It was a living reminder of the wrath of the gods and the consequences of challenging their mandates. Hercules came determined, but not without caution. I knew that facing a bull sent by Poseidon would not be a simple task. He had faced terrible creatures before, but every encounter with the supernatural brought with him a new type of danger. When observing the animal's footprints on the dry earth, he felt the weight of the test in front of him. The air was loaded with tension, as if the bull himself could perceive the presence of the hero and was waiting for the confrontation. The meeting soon arrived. Hercules found the bull grazing in a meadow, apparently quiet. But as soon as the semi-step took a step forward, the beast lifted the cab, his eyes like two burns on. With a branch that seemed to arise from the depths of the ocean, the bull loaded towards him, raising a cloud of dust and shaking the ground with his fury. The first shock was brutal. Hercules tried to dodge the horns, but the strength of the onslaught pushed him back. However, its resistance was legendary. He raised quickly, adjusting his position and evaluating his adversary. This was not a battle that could be won with brute force only. It required strategy, patience, and a clear mind, even in the midst of chaos. With fast and precise movements, Hercules began to surround the bull, looking for the right time to attack him. The beast, in his anger, continued ramming, but the hero knew how to take advantage of the lack of precision in his attacks. In a moment of distraction, Hercules threw himself into the animal, dodging his horns for a hair and clinging to his muscular neck. It was a fierce fight. The bull twisted, trying to shake off his back, but Hercules did not release his grip. Sweat ran down his face as he felt the pure power of the animal under his hands. Each bull muscle seemed loaded with divine energy, and tame it was like trying to control the ocean fury. But Hercules had something that the bull does not, an unwavering will. With a last effort, he managed to hold the animal's horns and forced him to the ground, imposing his strength on the indomitable creature. Silence fell on the meadow. The beast, although defeated, still breathed strongly, like a volcano that refuses to extinguish. Hercules, with his hand still firmly attached to the horns of the bull, took a time to recover his breath. This was not an enemy that could be destroyed, it was a sacred being, destined to be captured, not killed. With that thought in mind, he tied the bull with reinforced ropes and began the arduous way back to Eurystheus. The march towards Corinto was long and exhausting. The bull, although controlled, kept resisting. His strength was still impressive, but Hercules did not allow fatigue or frustration to seize him. Each step was a reminder of his mission, of the burden he had accepted and the weight of his own mistakes that had taken him to these works. When he finally arrived at the Eurystheus palace, the king, as usual, received him with fear and astonishment. He ordered the bull to be released, because he did not want such a powerful creature to remain close. The beast was sent to wander for Attica, where it would later find its end in the hands of another hero, Theseus. This work, although successfully fulfilled, left Hercules with a bitter taste. He had once again demonstrated his strength and his ability to overcome the impossible, but he had also felt the weight of the gods in each movement of the bull, reminding him that his challenges were not mere physical tests, but also spiritual. While moving away from the Eurystheus palace, his mind could not avoid anticipating the next works that expected him, loaded with new dangers and challenges that would test his body not only, but also his soul. The horizon was dyed from a deep red when Hercules reached Thrace, a land known for its hardness and savagery. There was expected the eighth work, one that resonated with a danger as grotesque as fascinating, the mares of Diamonds. The air around that place seemed loaded with death, with a stench that remembered abandoned battlefields. The locals, terrified, looked at him from a distance, too scared to offer help, but unable to look away from the man who dared to face those monsters. The mares were creatures of a dark and terrifying beauty. His eyes shone like burning embers, and his teeth, sharp as blades, were designed to tear meat easily. His crines, black like the night, seemed to move alive, and their legs hit the ground with a force that made the earth tremble. Hercules, accustomed to face the supernatural, knew that these beasts could not be overcome with gross force only. He would have to use not only his physical power, but also his cunning and understanding of wild nature. Before acting, Hercules evaluated the land. He observed how the mares moved, restless and aggressive, within its limits. The stable was not a safe place to face them directly. If they attacked in unison, even their divine strength may not be enough. Then, he decided that he had to neutralize the source of his savagery, Diamonds himself. The king of Thrace, upon learning of the presence of the hero, did not receive it with fear, but with an excessive arrogance. He made fun of Hercules, ensuring that his mares would devour their flesh as they had done with so many others. But Diamonds underestimated his opponent's resolution. With an impressive speed, Hercules disarmed the king and took him as a prisoner. Then, in an unexpected turn that showed both its pragmatism and its hardness, it led it directly to the stable. There, without hesitation, he threw the cruel king with the jaws of his own beasts. The mares, crazy about the smell of fresh flesh, pounced on him, devouring his master and satisfying his voracity momentarily. This act, although brutal, had an unexpected effect. When feeding on Diamonds, the mares seemed to calm down, as if they had absorbed the essence of their cruel master and lost some of their fury. Hercules took advantage of this moment to act. With his legendary force, he dominated the creatures one by one, holding them with reins and ties that he had prepared in advance. The mares fought, but he was firm, imposing its will on that of the beasts. Once tamed, the mares were tied together and driven outside of Thrace. The news of his capture spread rapidly, and the villagers, who had lived under the terror of Diamonds and their monsters, left their hiding places to see the man who had achieved the impossible. Some cried with relief, others acclaimed him as a savior. But Hercules, accustomed not to stop at the praise, continued his way to Corinto, leading the mares as proof of his success. When he arrived at the Eurystheus palace, the king, as always, was horrified by the appearance of animals. He ordered that they be released immediately, because they feared that they could unleash chaos within their domains. Hercules obeyed, and the mares were sent far away, where, according to some versions of the myth, it is said that they were consecrated to the gods or devoured by wild animals. This work was not only a proof of the physical force of Hercules, but also of its ability to make difficult decisions in extreme situations. The cruelty of Diamonds and the insatiable hunger of mares were reflexes of the horrors that humans could unleash when they forgot the limits of power and compassion. When tame the mares, Hercules not only fulfilled his task, but also ended a dark chapter in the history of Thrace. While moving away from the palace, with the still fresh memory of the wights and the screams of Diamonds, Hercules knew that the worst was yet to come. Each job seemed to push it closer to a final confrontation, a test that would test not only its body, but also its spirit and its ability to resist the load that the gods had put on their shoulders. The wind loaded with Hercules' face hit while his ship approached the coast of Themyscira, home of the Amazon. These warriors, legendary by their strength, courage and discipline, lived in a kingdom that many men even mentioning. There he ruled Hippolyta, a queen of great renown, whose magical belt was the reason for the ninth work of Hercules. This belt was not a simple ornament, but a gift from Mars, god of war, a symbol of his leadership and the devotion of the Amazons to their warrior customs. Hercules arrived with a mission that, apparently, seemed simple: obtain the belt and deliver it to Eurystheus as proof of his feat. However, behind that task there was a complexity that did not depend solely on its strength. Diplomacy would be key, because facing an Amazon army in its own territory was a challenge even for a half Wednesday. But the presence of Hercules in Themyscira aroused as much curiosity and distrust between the warriors. When Hippolyta received it, he did it with a mixture of interest and caution. The queen, tall and powerful, radiated authority. His gaze was penetrating, and each movement demonstrated the security of someone accustomed to command. Hercules, aware that direct confrontation would be a mistake, spoke with sincerity, explaining his task and the reason behind his arrival. To his surprise, Hippolyta listened carefully and, after a brief silence, agreed to deliver his belt. It was a sample of respect among equals, a truce based on the mutual admiration of two legendary figures. However, the gods could not allow this work to be resolved without blood spill. Hera, observing from Olympus with his usual resentment to Hercules, decided to intervene. Disguised as Amazoa, he ran among the warriors, spreading the rumor that the hero had come to kidnap his queen and submit his people. Distrust was rapidly transformed into anger, and a war clamor resonated in Themyscira. The chaos unleashed when the Amazons surrounded Hercules, throwing shouts of battle and wielding their weapons with ferocity. The truce was broken in an instant, and the hero, now cornered, was forced to fight. Although his intention was not to harm the warriors, his life was in danger, and he could not afford to falter. The confrontation was brutal. Hercules, with his unique strength, fought dozens of Amazons at the same time, dodging their arrows and blocking their spears. The warriors, trained not to show mercy, attacked in impeccable synchronization, demonstrating why they were feared worldwide. Each blow that Hercules gave was not only an act of defense, but also a reminder that even a half-wed could be taken to the limit. Hippolyta, realizing the deception, tried to stop the battle, but the frenzy was already uncontrollable. In the middle of the tumult, Hercules, being surrounded and with few options, headed towards the queen. With a determined movement, he disarmed it and took the belt. He did not do it violently, but with the urgency of someone who sought to end the conflict. The Amazon, seeing their queen defeated, ceased their attack, although the atmosphere was still loaded with tension. Hippolyta, even standing despite the defeat, observed Hercules with a mixture of respect and resignation. Although he had lost his belt, he showed no hatred or resentment towards the hero. Instead, he recognized the inevitability of what happened and accepted his destiny with dignity. His gaze seemed to tell him that, although he had won this battle, his victory was not free of scars. Hercules left Themyscira with his belt in his possession, but his heart was loaded with thoughts. The battle, although necessary, was not something I would have wanted. He had faced an honorable people, warriors who were not enemies, but victims of the cruel games of the gods. This work was not like the others. There were no monsters to defeat or evil to eradicate, only misunderstandings and divine manipulations that forced him to act against his will. When he arrived in Tirinto and presented the belt to Eurystheus, the king could not hide his delight. For him, it was a simple more proof of the power of Hercules and his ability to fulfill any order, regardless of circumstances. But for the hero, this work left a different brand, a reminder that not all victories were achieved with honor, and that even the largest heroes could be pawns in the whims of the gods. While he moved away from the palace, with the echo of the cries of the Amazon still resonating in his mind, Hercules could not help asking what new challenges would expect. He knew that the remaining works would take him further, not only physically, but also in the confrontation with the limits of his own humanity. The sun slowly descended on the horizon, painting the sky of a crimson red that mixed with the growing shadows. For Hercules, this twilight marked the beginning of one of the most challenging works, recovering Geryon oxen, a monstrous being who lived on the distant island of Eretia, beyond the confines of the known world. This 10th work would lead to the limit, facing not only impossible creatures, but also to the weight of its own isolation in a journey towards the unknown. Geryon was not any enemy. It was a giant of 3 bodies, 3 heads, and a force that rivaled that of the gods. His oxen were sacred creatures of a red so intense that they seemed to be bathed in fire, guarded by Otro, a 2-headed dog descended from Typhon and Equidna, and by the pastor Eurytion. Recovering them not only involved defeating these creatures, but also challenging the natural order of a world where the boundaries between men, gods, and monsters blurred. The trip to Eretia was long and dangerous. Hercules crossed the bracing deserts where the earth burned under his feet. For days, he endured a heat so intense that even a half a lingency could have succumbed. In his fury against the elements, Hercules raised his arch and fired an arrow in the sun, challenging Helios for his implacable heat. The god, surprised by his audacity, did not respond with anger, but with compassion. Recognizing the strength of the hero, he lent his golden cup, a heavenly ship with which he could cross the waters and reach the island of Geryon. The arrival in Eretia did not offer rest. Before facing Geryon, Hercules had to overcome his guardians. Otro was the first to attack him, his 2 heads barking with fury as he threw himself into the hero. With an accurate blow of his club, Hercules he knocked him down, leaving behind the still body of the monstrous dog. Eurytion, the shepherd, tried to defend the oxen, but had no chance against the superhuman force of the semi-Urlings. Then, from the depths of the island, Geryon appeared. His presence was imposing, an amalgam of strength and monstrosity that seemed to challenge the laws of nature. The 3 heads spoke in unison, every voice echoing like a thunder. Armed with a sword and a shield that seemed made of the same fire that burned in his eyes, Geryon advanced to Hercules with a huge fury. The battle was a titanic shock, a confrontation that shook the earth and resonated in the heavens. Hercules, although exhausted by the trip and the previous clashes, fought with the determination of someone who could not afford to fail. Geryon attacked with amazing speed and strength, his 3 bodies moving in perfect coordination, each blow designed to destroy. But Hercules, with his instinct from Guerrero and his experience in impossible fighting, managed to dodge his attacks, looking for the exact moment to counterattack. Finally, raising his arch, fired an arrow impregnated with the blood of the Hydra of Lerna, whose poison was lethal even for the most formidable creatures. The arrow crossed the side of Geryon, and the giant issued a scream that seemed to divide the sky into 2. With his last breath, he fell to the ground, his immense body trembling before being motionless. Hercules gathered the oxen, guiding them to the golden cup of Helios, which was waiting for him to transport it back. The return trip was not free of complications. Along the way, he found resistance from local tribes and bandits who tried to steal the oxen, attracted by their mythical beauty. But Hercules, now hardened by his confrontation with Geryon, defeated them one after another, protecting animals with a ferocity that matched that of the same monsters he had faced. When he finally arrived in Tirinto, he presented the oxen to Eurystheus. As expected, the king showed his usual mixture of fear and jealousy to the success of Hercules. He ordered that the oxen were sacrificed in honor of Hera, an ironic gesture that only reinforced the contempt of the gods towards the hero. While Hercules watched how the oxen were taken to the altar, he could not help feeling once again as a piece on the dashboard of the gods. He had traveled to the limits of the world, faced with a giant who challenged all logic, and triumphed. However, the reward was not glory or rest, but a new job, a new challenge that would move him away even more from any hope of peace. The horizon spread in front of him, as a promise of more battles and suffering. But inside, Hercules knew that his destiny was not to seek tranquility, but to continue advancing, facing the challenges that the gods put on their way, and demonstrating, once again, that even the half-fashioned could load with the weight of the impossible. The air was loaded with mystery while Hercules undertook his 11th work, recovering the golden apples of the Hesperides' garden. These apples were not common fruits, they were gifts, Mother Earth, the gods, and it was said that they conferred immortality. Guarded by the Hesperides, daughters of the night, and by the dragon Ladin, 100 heads that never slept, the apples were out of the reach of any mortal. But Hercules, a demigod marked by fate, had to face the impossible once again. The problem was not only the challenge itself, but also the location of the garden, a place whose existence was whispered in the confines of the known world, beyond maps and legends. Hercules, armed with his determination and his weapons, knew that the road would be long and dangerous. As he advanced, he asked sages, traveled through unknown lands, and faced minor evidence that delayed him, but also tempered his spirit. In his search, he found Nereo, the old god of the sea, known for his wisdom and ability to transform. To obtain the information he needed, Hercules fought against Nereo, clinging to him while changing shape, becoming water, fire, and snake. Finally, defeated, Nereo revealed the location of the garden, guiding him to the place where the stars seemed to touch the earth. After weeks of travel, Hercules arrived at the garden. There, in the middle of a landscape of unreal beauty, he saw the trees of golden apples shining as if they contained the sunlight. But between him and his target was the thief, the dragon of 100 heads, whose eyes watched every corner of the garden. The hero knew that facing the dragon would be a monumental battle, but also understood that there was another way to achieve his goal. Near the garden was Atlas, the titan condemned to hold the sky over his shoulders. Hercules decided to seek his help, because it was said that Atlas was the father of the Hesperides and had access to the garden without fighting the thieves. When Hercules reached him, he found the exhausted titan, with the tense muscles for the weight of the sky, but with a look that still showed the strength of someone who had challenged the gods. Hercules proposed a deal. He offered to load with the sky temporarily if Atlas agreed to collect the golden apples by him. Atlas, hearing this, could not help smiling at the audacity of the hero. He agreed, perhaps intrigued by the idea of freeing himself, even if only for a moment, of the punishment he had endured for millennia. With a superhuman effort, Hercules took the weight of the sky, feeling how his entire body trembled under pressure. It was a pain that challenged imagination, as if its essence was being crushed. But he remained firm, supporting the suffering while seeing Atlas disappear in the direction of the garden. The Titan returned shortly after, carrying the golden apples, whose brightness seemed to illuminate even the deepest shadows. Atlas, feeling freedom for the first time in countless years, suggested that he would take apples to Eurystheus, leaving Hercules carrying the sky indefinitely. But Hercules, with his characteristic ingenuity, pretended to agree and asked Atlas to hold the sky just a moment while he adjusted his position. As soon as the Titan resumed the load, Hercules picked up the apples and said goodbye, leaving Atlas trapped in his eternal punishment. The return of Hercules was no less complicated. The apples, being divine objects, attracted the attention of all kinds of creatures and ambitious people who tried to snatch them. But his strength and determination kept him safe until he reached Tirinto, where he presented the apples to Eurystheus. As usual, the king did not understand the magnitude of Hercules' achievement. He ordered that the apples were returned to the gods, demonstrating that, for him, each of the hero's works was just a means to subjugate him, not a sample of his greatness. Athena, intervening, took the apples and returned them to the garden of the Hesperides, making sure they returned to their sacred place. While Hercules watched how apples moved away, he understood that their success did not reside in the object obtained, but in its ability to overcome the limits imposed by the gods and humanity. This work, more than any other, reminded him that even in the most difficult tests, his cunning, resistance, and will were the true sources of his strength. However, there was still a last job, a last test that would lead him to the depths of Hades and beyond everything he had faced so far. The darkness of the underworld was not like the night, it was a dense, impenetrable void, loaded with echoes of regrets and lost whispers. For Hercules, this 12th work was not simply another physical challenge, it was a deeper decline in existence, a confrontation with death itself. Eurystheus, in his contempt and fear of the hero, had ordered what seemed impossible: bring to Cerbero, the monstrous guardian of Hades, to the surface. Hercules knew that this work could not only be achieved with brute force. Preparing for his descent, he looked for the gods who governed the underworld, Hades and Persephone, because only with his permission could try to face Cerbero without unleashing the anger of the kingdom of the dead. But before this, he went to Eleusis, where he submitted to the mysteric rite that would grant him the necessary purification to walk among the dead without being caught by them. The crossing to Hades began in a dark and gloomy place, where the Stygia River marked the border between the world of the living and the kingdom of the dead. Charonte, the boatman, observed it with distrust. But seeing the brightness of the currency in the hands of Hercules, he agreed to transport it, paddling silently while the hero contemplated the dark river, whose waters seemed to murmur the secret they had crossed before him. The underworld was deployed before his eyes as a nightmare landscape. Wandering souls wandered aimlessly, their faces crooked in expressions of eternal pain. The shadows seemed to come alive, surrounding him as he walked with firm steps towards the Hades palace. There, among black columns like the obsidian, he found the god of the dead sitting on his throne, with Persephone by his side, a figure as ethereal as imposing. With a reverence, Hercules presented its purpose. He explained that he did not seek to disturb the breach of the underworld, but to fulfill the mandate that had been imposed on him. Hades, after listening to the hero, imposed a condition: he could take Cerbero, but only if he managed to dominate him without using weapons. Persephone, with a slight inclination of Caesar, observed Hercules with a mixture of compassion and curiosity, as if he understood the weight of the load he carried. Guided by a silent soul, Hercules came to the entrance where Cerbero waited. The monstrous three-headed dog was a terrifying vision. His fangs were daggers that shone under a dim light, his eyes burned with a supernatural fire, and his body was covered with dark scales that looked like steel. But what impacted the most was his tail, a snake that twisted and scintillated with the same fury as the guardians' heads. Cerbero roared when he saw the intruder, a sound that reverberated in the depths of the underworld. Hercules did not go back. Without weapons in his hands, he advanced to the monster, trusting his strength and in the domain he had perfected during the previous works. The confrontation was brutal. Cerbero attacked with his heads, biting and throwing slips, while the snake of his tail sought to wrap the hero. Hercules, with amazing speed and skill, dodged the attacks, studying the movements of the beast. At a critical moment, he threw himself on Cerbero, holding one of the heads with his iron hands while fighting to immobilize the others. The dog twisted, roaring and throwing bites in the air, but Hercules did not release his grip. With a force that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, he managed to submit the monster, holding it until he finally surrendered, gasping under his control. With the permission of Hades, Hercules began the arduous way back, taking Cerbero with him. As they ascended towards the world of the living, the monster struggled to free himself, but Hercules maintained his domain, advancing with an unwavering determination. The echoes of the useless regret seemed to try to retain him, as if the place itself would not want to leave it. When he finally emerged in daylight, taking Cerbero chained, but alive, the world seemed to stop. The people who saw him backed away from the vision of the monster, whose roar still resonated with the fury of Hades. Upon arriving in Tirinto, he introduced Cerbero against Eurystheus, who, as expected, reacted with panic, hiding after his guards and ordering Hercules to return the underworld to the monster. Hercules fulfilled the order, returning to Cerbero to his place as guardian del Hades. While watching the monster disappear in the shadows, he felt something different inside. This work had not only been a proof of strength or courage, it had been a confrontation with the deepest fear of every human being, death itself. He had descended to the kingdom of the dead and returned, not only alive, but also with the certainty that, although fate pushed him towards the impossible, his spirit would continue to resist. The sun shone with a renewed intensity when Hercules returned to the world of the living. Although he knew that his trip was not yet ended, he also understood that he had reached something that very few could imagine. He had defeated not only the monsters, but also in the shadows that lurk in the heart of each being. And with that thought, he walked towards the horizon, ready to face what came. In the last works of Hercules, the myth enters territories that transcend physical strength and traditional heroic feats. Each test seems designed not only to challenge the body, but also the spirit, leading to the hero towards a deep transformation, one that connects it with fundamental aspects of human existence: fear, mortality, and purpose. These final works, especially obtaining the apples of the Hesperides and the capture of Cerbero, become powerful symbols of spiritual improvement and confrontation with the inevitable. The 11th work, in which Hercules must recover golden apples, is a clear example of this symbolic dimension. Apples represent much more than a simple trophy. His immortal brightness evokes human yearning for the eternal, a deep desire to transcend the limits of earthly life. But to reach them, Hercules must not only face the physical challenges of the road, but must also resort to their ingenuity and humility, qualities that demonstrate growth beyond the brute force that defined it in their first works. The meeting with Atlas in this work is particularly revealing. Hercules not only loads with the literal weight of the sky, but also with the symbolic weight of the responsibility and consequences of their actions. This moment encapsulates the essence of myth. Greatness is not measured solely by the ability to conquer, but also by the will to endure. By using his cunning to convince Atlas to resume his load, Hercules shows that heroism does not only reside in the muscle, but also in the mind and spirit. However, it is the 12th IMO work, the descent to the underworld to capture Cerbero, who crystallizes the spiritual meaning of the last challenges. The underworld is more than a physical place, it is the universal symbol of the unknown, of what everyone is afraid but no one can avoid. When descending to this kingdom, Hercules faces the original fear that lives in all human beings, the fear of death. Cerbero, with his 3 heads and his fierce appearance, is not just a guardian, it is a manifestation of terror that accompanies the transit between life and death. By subjecting the monster without weapons, Hercules demonstrates that inner strength, will and self-control are the most powerful tools against the deepest fears. His victory is not a simple demonstration of power, it is an affirmation that fear can be faced, that even death can be looked into the eyes without surrendering. The act of loading with the sky and that of facing Cerbero are deeply connected with the idea of assuming universal loads. Hercules is not just a man facing individual challenges, it becomes an archetype of the human being that, by accepting its fragility and limitations, finds the strength to transcend them. Upon returning from the underworld, he not only demonstrates his courage, but also symbolizes the possibility of rebirth, of finding the light even after the darkest moments. In addition, these final works introduce a reflection on the place of Hercules in the cosmos. Up to this point, it had been a semi-trapped between the world of men and that of the gods, a being that sought to redeem itself through extraordinary feats. But with each step that takes compliance with their tasks, especially when facing death and returning, it is closer to its final destination, apotheosis, the transition from the human to the divine. The spiritual symbolism is also reflected in the interaction of Hercules with the gods in these works. Hades, Persephone, Athena, and others intervene in ways that emphasize the transcendental character of the tests. They are not just individual challenges, they are transformation rituals that prepare Hercules for their eternal place among immortals. In the heart of all this is the fight against fear. Not the superficial fear of facing monsters or physical dangers, but existential fear, that which paralyzes us to the unknown and makes us question our purpose. When completing the last works, Hercules not only conquers Cerbero or obtains golden apples, it also conquers its own mortality, accepting the inevitability of death and, in doing so, transcending it. The myth, therefore, not only tells the story of a hero that exceeds impossible evidence, but also offers a universal lesson on the human condition. Facing fear, accepting our limitations, and assuming our responsibilities are heroic acts in themselves. Through Hercules, we learn that true force does not reside in the body, but in the spirit, and that even in the face of the most frightening, there is a path to redemption and transcendence. While Hercules emerges from his last test, carrying not only with the weight of his exploits, but also with the knowledge of what it means to be truly human, the myth leaves us with a powerful image, that of a hero that, when confronting the eternal, it teaches us that greatness is not to avoid fear, but to face it with courage and purpose. In the last works of Hercules, the gods occupy a crucial place, not only as figures involved in key moments, but as representations of universal forces that guide, challenge, and observe the destiny of the hero. His role becomes especially prominent in the 11th and 12th work, where Hercules needs more than his physical strength, it requires wisdom, cunning, and the intervention of beings that transcend human understanding. These deities not only facilitate or complicate their task, but also reflect the complexity of relations between mortals and immortals. Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy, has been a constant ally of Hercules throughout her exploits. In recent works, your support is more symbolic and spiritual than physical. It represents the clarity of mind that Hercules needs to overcome challenges that cannot be resolved only strongly. During the descent to the underworld, Athena does not appear directly, but her presence is felt in the preparation of the hero. The purification rites in Eleusis, fundamental so that it could enter the kingdom of the dead without being trapped, are part of a spiritual legacy that Athena supports. His influence is manifested in Hercules' ability to face the chaos of the underworld with a serene mind and an unwavering determination. Hermes, the messenger of the gods and guidance of souls, plays a more paper 6 Sibyl in the 12th work. As a psychopompo, he is the only god capable of moving freely between the world of the living and that of the dead. It is Hermes who assures that Hercules can cross the borders of the underworld, a kingdom that, otherwise, would be forbidden for mortals. Its presence is reassuring, a sign that, even in the depths of darkness, there is a connection with the upper world. Hermes acts as a bridge, guaranteeing that Hercules is not lost in the labyrinth of shadows and regrets defined by the kingdom of Hades. The god Hades, meanwhile, occupies a unique place in this story. Although he is feared for his role as Lord of the Dead, his neutrality is remarkable. Hades does not intervene to hinder or facilitate Hercules' task, simply establish the rules of the game. When Hercules arrives at his palace to ask permission to take Cerbero, Hades listens to it impartially, showing an attitude that contrasts with the hostility of other gods like Hera. This fair treatment reflects the character of Hades as a god of balance. It does not seek unnecessary suffering, but neither allows anyone to challenge the laws of their domain without consequences. The condition that Hades imposes on Hercules is clear and direct: it can be taken to Cerbero, but only if he manages to submit it without weapons. This requirement underlines the essence of work. It is not a traditional confrontation, but a spiritual proof in which Hercules must demonstrate its control over fear and violence. Hades, by imposing this rule, ensures that the task is an act of inner domain, not just a deployment of physical force. Persephone, although he does not play an active role in the narrative, is present as a figure that balances the severity of Hades. His gaze, often described as enigmatic and full of compassion, recalls that even in the underworld, there is space for empathy. His silence in the face of Hercules could be interpreted as tacit approval, a recognition that this hero, more than any other, deserves an opportunity to demonstrate his worth. The interaction of Hercules with the gods in these final works highlights a central theme in Greek mythology: the interdependence between the human and the divine. Although the gods have immense power, they need mortals to manifest certain aspects of their will and their essence. Similarly, mortals depend on the gods to transcend the limits of their earthly existence. Hercules, as semi-glasses, is at the intermediate point of this relationship, representing both human aspirations and divine expectations. In the broader context of the works, the intervention of Athena, Hermes, and Hades reflects the different aspects of Hercules' trip. Athena symbolizes the wisdom and clarity that allow to make correct decisions even in desperate situations. Hermes represents the guide and connection, the reminder that, even in the darkest moments, we are not completely alone. Hades, with its neutrality, embodies the inevitability of death and the need to face it with honor and courage. By completing these last works, Hercules not only meets the tasks imposed by Eurystheus, it also establishes a deeper link with the gods, demonstrating that, although it can be punished and challenged, its heroic essence elevates it above the circumstances. This balance between the human and the divine, between physical and spiritual force, is what makes Hercules an immortal figure, not only in Greek mythology, but in the collective memory of humanity. The works of Hercules, a succession of impossible feats, come to an end with an echo of relief and transcendence. With the fulfillment of the 12th work, the hero achieves what seemed unattainable: his release of the Eurystheus yoke and, more importantly, reconciliation with himself and with his destiny. This closure is not only the end of a cycle of punishments, but a deep redemption that redefines Hercules as more than a man of huge force. It becomes an eternal symbol of struggle, sacrifice, and overcoming. The culmination of its Eurystheus service is a moment loaded with symbolism. For years, Hercules endured humiliations, inhuman tests, and the constant interference of the gods. Eurystheus, cowardly and full of envy, used it as a tool for its own fears and insecurities, constantly looking for ways of breaking the hero. But Hercules, despite its explosive character and its impulsive nature, demonstrated perseverance that transcends human pride. By completing each work, not only satisfied Eurystheus' whims, but also advanced in a path of self-wearing and purification. When Hercules presents Cerbero against Eurystheus, fear paralyzes the king. This last act, rather than any other, naked Eurystheus' smallness in front of the greatness of Hercules. Eurystheus, terrified, orders that the monster be returned to the underworld immediately, unable to tolerate his presence. This moment not only closes the cycle of works, but also invests the dynamics of power. The hero, which was subjected and humiliated, now emerges as the dominant figure, free of the shadow of its oppressor. But the redemption of Hercules does not only come from the release of the Eurystheus service. Its true transformation occurs at a more intimate and deep level. Throughout the works, Hercules faced not only monsters and physical tests, but also his own demons, the fault for the murder of his wife and children, the anger that controlled him, and the pain of being a semi-trapped between two worlds. Each task took a step closer to facing these internal loads, forcing him to look inside himself and confront the scars he carried. The descent to the underworld, in particular, marked a turning point on his trip. When facing Cerbero and returning alive, Hercules not only challenged death, but also accepted it as part of its existence. This act of courage and acceptance frees it from the invisible chains that tied it to its guilt and mortality. He is no longer simply a man who seeks to redeem himself, it becomes a being that understands the nature of the sacrifice and the value of facing fear. The end of the works also marks a transition to its final destination. Hercules, now free from your debt to Eurystheus, is ready to occupy a place among the gods. But this apotheosis is not immediate. Before his ascension, the hero continues to face challenges and conflicts, many of which arise from his own nature and the circumstances that surround him. However, the difference is that, having completed the works, Hercules has reached clarity and spiritual strength that prepare him for his eternal destiny. Hercules' transformation is not just a change in their external condition, it is an internal evolution that elevates it above human limitations. This process of redemption and liberation resonates deeply in Greek mythology, where heroes often face evidence not only to demonstrate their strength, but to achieve a level of wisdom and self-knowledge that brings them closer to the divine. In the case of Hercules, its journey makes it a model of resistance and transcendence, a reminder that even the greatest charges can be overcome with will and determination. In the end, Hercules is not simply a hero that completes impossible tasks, it is a symbol of human struggle for meaning and redemption. Its history teaches us that greatness does not lie in perfection, but in the ability to face our failures and find a purpose beyond them. With the finished works, Hercules leaves behind the burden of their sins and prepares for the next chapter of its existence, one that will take it beyond the limits of the human and towards immortality. Eurystheus, the weak and fearful king who tried to submit Hercules, occupies a peculiar place in the history of the hero. Despite his obvious cowardice and attempts to get rid of Hercules with impossible works, Eurystheus' legacy is inexorably intertwined with that of the hero who pretended to humiliate. Paradoxically, the works imposed on Hercules, destined to be punishments, ended up being the engine of their own immortalization, although not in the way he would have desired. Eurystheus was a small man in front of a gigantic figure, and Hercules, both in terms of character and presence. His appointment as king of Mycenae was not for his own merit, but for a ploy of Hera, who sought to humiliate Zeus's son. From the beginning, his power was the result of a divine intervention, a sign that even the gods could commit acts of cruel favoritism. However, Eurystheus did not know how to take advantage of that privileged position to act with greatness. His weak character, marked by envy and fear, defined his reign and his relationship with Hercules. Eurystheus' legacy is not forged through his own actions, but of his role as antagonist in the Epic of Hercules. When imposing the 12 works, Eurystheus was recorded in the annals of Greek mythology, but not as a decent king or a wise leader. His figure became a necessary contrast, a shadow that accentuated the brightness of the hero. In each of the works, their fear and meanness were evidenced, while the courage and ingenuity of Hercules rose to new heights. One of the most revealing moments of Eurystheus' character was his reaction to the success of Hercules. Every time the hero returned victorious, the fear and frustration of Eurystheus grew. "I couldn't bear the idea that Hercules I knew rare the evidence he had designed to destroy it." On one occasion, after the return of Hercules with the Lion of Nemea, Eurystheus did not even have the courage to face the hero. He ordered that the rewards and reports on the works be delivered from a distance, hiding into an underground amphora to protect themselves from the power he imagined in Hercules. However, the impact of Eurystheus transcends its cowardice. By imposing the work, without knowing it, he gave Hercules the opportunity to transform into the symbol we know. The works were not only a proof of strength and skill, but a way for Hercules to face his guilt, reconcile with his past, and ascend towards a spiritual redemption. Although Eurystheus sought to punish, it ended up being an involuntary agent of the growth and immortalization of Hercules. The irony is that, without Eurystheus, the works would not have existed. Without its envy and fear, the story of Hercules would have been different, perhaps less resonant. In this sense, Eurystheus becomes a tragic figure, not because he suffered great losses or misadventures, but because his life and actions were completely eclipsed by the legacy of the hero whom he tried to submit. His name is remembered, but not as he would have wanted. He mentions it with Hercules, not as an equal, but as an obstacle, a reflection of human defects that contrast with the greatness of the hero. It is impossible to deny that, through the works, Eurystheus also acquired a type of immortality. Although their motives were petty and their behavior despicable, their role was essential for the development of one of the most emblematic narratives of Greek mythology. His legacy is intrinsically linked to that of Hercules, not because of his own merit, but for the indirect impact of his decisions. Eurystheus, with their fears and defects, becomes a reminder of how even smaller figures can have an impact on history. Although it did not reach greatness, it was recorded in the collective memory thanks to the brightness that, unintentionally, helped project on Hercules. Ultimately, his role as a catalyst of the works is assured by a place in history, not as a decent king, but as a figure that, despite his cowardice, left an indelible mark on the myth. The marriage of Hercules and Deianira is one of the most tragic and complex episodes of the life of the hero, marked by love, distrust, and a fatality that, in the end, leads to the perdition. Deianira, daughter of Il and nympha Deianira, was a beautiful and virtuous woman, who saw in Hercules a strong and noble man, someone with whom she would share her life. However, its union was full of shadow, not only because of Hercules' mistakes, but also for the interventions of destiny, which wove a history of jealousy and misfortune. It all started with the famous journey of Hercules and Deianira towards their home. During their trip, they arrived at a Caudaloso river where they found the centaur Niso, a half, and a horse being, which offered to help them cross. However, what seemed like an act of goodness quickly transformed into a trap. While Hercules crossed the river, Niso tried to rape Deianira, which unleashed the wrath of Hercules. In an outburst of fury, Hercules fired an poisoned arrow, killing the centaur. But before he died, Niso launched Deianira a curse, assuring him that, if Hercules was ever unfaithful, she could use her blood as a remedy to recover it, believing that she would do it to her, if she came to doubt her love. With the passage of time, and although the marriage of Hercules and Deianira was marked by several adventures and challenges, a shadow of insecurity grew in the heart of the wife. Hercules' victories and achievements attracted the attention of many women, which caused Deianira to fear that her husband could leave her or find another woman. The image of the blood of the centaur, which he still possessed, began to obsess it. In his despair, he believed that it was the only way to maintain Hercules' love, use Niso's blood to make sure he remained faithful to her. However, what Deianira did not know is that the blood of the centaur was impregnated with the poison of the Hercules arrows, a poison that could not only heal, but was also deadly. By using blood as an ointment in Hercules' robe, without knowing that poison would infiltrate his body, Deianira unintentionally sealed her husband's fatal destiny. Hercules, at the tunic, began to feel unbearable pain. The flames of inhuman suffering devoured him, and his body was filled with an intense anguish that he could not bear it. Desperate, Hercules tried to start his tunic, but it was too late. The agony invaded him with a brutal force, and in his pain, shouted the name of Deianira. When she is in, he terminated what he had caused. The weight of guilt fell on her as a slab. Torn by pain and tragedy, Deianira could not bear the fault that consumed her, and took her life. The tragic outcome of this marriage reflects not only the inevitability of fate, but also how good intentions can lead to disastrous results when the poorly understood governs the heart. Although Deianira never intended to harm her beloved husband, the chain of decisions, influenced by the poison of hatred and jealousy, sealed her destiny. The encounter with Niso and his curse was the seed of the tragedy that would mark the last stage of Hercules' life. The fatality of this episode not only affects those involved, but also highlights human fragility, even in the greatest heroes. Hercules, the man who had defeated monsters and crossed dark kingdoms, fell victim of a mistake, product of his love and confidence in his wife. In his last moments of agony, Hercules, with the strength of his will and his destiny as great as his pain, faced his own suffering, beyond physical tests and divine enmity. This tragic marriage, like everything in the life of Hercules, was marked by the duality of the heroic and the human, where nobility and sacrifice are intertwined with vulnerability and suffering. Deianira, despite her mistakes, was a woman who deeply loved her husband, and her story is a reminder of how human emotions, as powerful as love and fear, can even alter the course of the greatest destinations. Niso's tragedy is one of those stories within Greek mythology that reflects how revenge, betrayal, and bad decisions can lead to unforeseen and devastating consequences, even for the greatest heroes. Although Niso, the centaur, is a relatively secondary character in the vast story of Hercules, its impact on the life of the demigod will be as great as to seal its destiny and cause its tragic death. Niso, a wild and strong centaur, lived near the banks of the Evans River, in an aggregate landscape and section of civilization. It was during a trip by Hercules and his wife, Deianira, that the fate of Niso and the heroes were made fateful. The centaur, like many others of his race, was known for his irascible temperament and his combative nature, but in this encounter, his betrayal would be marked by the brutality of his act. When Hercules, Deianira, and his companions reached the waters of the Evans, met the centaur, who offered to help them cross the river. Although at first it seemed an offer of goodness, Niso's intentions were far from selfless. While Hercules crossed the river, the centaur tried to violate Deianira, taking advantage of the situation. It was then that the hero, in an outburst of anger and protection, fired one of his poisoned arrows with the blood of the Hydra of Lerna, killing Niso in the spot. However, before he died, Niso, with his last breath, launched a curse on Hercules and Deianira. In an attempt to revenge, he told Deianira that, if he ever feared that Hercules be betrayed or stop loving her, he should take his blood and rub it on her husband's robe. Believing that Niso's blood had magical powers and would be a remedy that would ensure the eternal love of Hercules, Deianira kept the poison with the hope that one day it would be necessary. Niso's tragedy is a story of revenge that transcends his own death. Over the years, the poison that the centaur left in his blood would become the cause of agony and, finally, the death of Hercules. Niso's curse not only represented posthumous revenge, but also the inevitability of destiny, because what began as an attempt to rape and murder became a much greater tragedy, which would drag Hercules towards its end. Niso's poison, which had been used by Deianira in a moment of despair, was the cause of fatality that would affect Hercules in his last moments of life. Although Deianira had no idea what he was causing, the blood of the centaur, when applied to Hercules' robe, condemned him to suffer indescribable pain. As the poison infiltrated his body, Hercules experienced unbearable agony. It was as if the physical pain was just a part of the torment. The suffering he felt was also spiritual, the product of the impotence of not being able to get rid of the poison that devoured him. What began as a struggle to protect his wife ended up being a chain of events that would lead to his own disappearance. In his agony, Hercules tried to start his tunic, but the painful reality was that the poison had already penetrated too deep. In his suffering, realized that even his superhuman strength was not enough to overcome the curse that Niso had left as a legacy. Niso's tragedy, therefore, is not only an act of revenge of a dying centaur, but also a symbol of how the actions of an individual, even after his death, can drag others to ruin. Niso's blood, which in Deianira's mind represented a tool to ensure love and faithfulness, became the poison that sealed her husband's fate, the same hero who had faced monsters and gods. The death of Hercules, marked by Nesos's poison, highlights one of the deepest lessons of Greek mythology. No matter how invincible it is a hero, it will always be exposed to the consequences of its past actions and the invisible threads of the destination that, sometimes, they are thrown by unknown hands. Nesos's tragedy, then, becomes a metaphor of human fragility, a reminder that even the greatest heroes can be defeated by something that escapes its understanding. Hercules, throughout his life, was not only a warrior destined to fulfill the works imposed by Eurystheus, but also a traveling hero, a man whose fame traveled vast territories, from the furthest coast to the darkest corners of the world ancient. His journey was not only marked by the monsters he defeated or the people he saved, but also for the construction of his own legacy through the foundation of cities, temples, and sacred places that would last long after his death. Hercules' trip took him to places that no mortal dared to step on. After the end of the 12 works, which consecrated him as the greatest hero of Greek mythology, his adventures did not end. His name became synonymous with courage, but also of wisdom acquired through his contact with divine and human beings. As Hercules continued his pilgrimage, his figure transcended that of a simple warrior, to become a leader and a founder. One of the most notable episodes of his life was the foundation of the city of Hercules, in honor of himself. This city, located in the Arcadia region, became a sacred place, a testament to heroism and the greatness of Hercules. In this city, temples dedicated to several gods were built, especially Zeus, his father, and Athena, the goddess who had supported him on numerous occasions. Hercules, when founding this city, not only consolidated its own power, but also assured that future generations would remember their exploits and sacrifice. On his trips, Hercules also had contact with other mythological figures that helped him expand his influence. For example, in his encounter with King Pholus, a centaur, and the centaur Chiron, who became his teacher in the art of medicine, Hercules not only acquired combat skills, but also teachings about life and duty. His relationship with Chiron was particularly significant, since the centaur, known for his wisdom, taught Hercules about the importance of moderation, compassion, and respect for nature. Another important aspect of Hercules' trips was the participation in various wars and battles that were not part of the works imposed by Eurystheus. An example of this is his intervention in the war against the Titans. Although he is not remembered for it as much as for the works, Hercules played a crucial role in the fight against these giants, a battle that had deep consequences for the balance between gods and mortals. His intervention saved many, but also marked his life with the weight of war, leaving him emotional scars that would accompany him until the end. But beyond the battles and victories, Hercules' trips led him to found temples dedicated to the gods. In several of his stops, Hercules built altars and temples to worship the gods who had helped him. The most famous of these temples is that of Zeus, in Olympia, which was built by Hercules himself after his victory in the Olympic Games. These temples became sanctuaries where the Greeks came to pay tribute to the gods, and at the same time, to celebrate strength, sacrifice, and virtue embodied in Hercules. In this sense, the figure of Hercules was not only that of a mythological hero, but that of a religious founder whose actions contributed to the establishment of a divine order on the earth. Hercules' trips also led him to the most remote lands of mythology. On his journey towards the distant east, he faced creatures such as the desert monsters, and in his encounter with the Hesperides, he pursued the golden apples that represented immortality. These works, although symbolic, were evidence of their ability to cross cold frontiers, not only geographical, but spiritual. Through these trips, Hercules acquired a deeper understanding of himself and the relationship between gods and mortals. Every city that founded, every temple that raised, was a manifestation of that understanding. In the end, Hercules' trips are not only stories of struggle and glory, but also of growth and transformation. The figure of Hercules as a traveler hero is not limited to the physical battles that he fought, but to the expansion of his legacy as leader, protector, and founder. His trips made him a legendary figure, not only in terms of power and strength, but also as someone who left a lasting mark on the Greek culture, in the temples he built, in the cities he founded, and in the myths that were counted about him. The traveling hero, who crossed rivers and mountains, who defeated monsters and founded cities, is a figure that represents the human ability to face the unknown, to overcome obstacles and create something bigger than oneself. Hercules' trips are, after all, the trips of all men in their search to find their place in the world, their purpose, and leave a legacy that transcends their mortal life. Hercules, although a half-human being, always faced an internal paradox that defined much of its existence, the constant struggle between its deadly nature and its desire to achieve immortality. Son of Zeus, the king of the gods, and Alcmena, a mortal woman, Hercules possessed the strength and courage of a god, but also the vulnerability and suffering of mortals. This duality, always present in his life, led him to question his destiny, his purpose, and what really meant being immortal. Since his birth, Hercules was marked by a prophecy that seemed to seal his destiny. Zeus's divine power ran through his veins, but his mother's mortality kept him tied to the pain and fragility of human life. This contradiction persecuted him throughout his existence. Throughout his adventures and works, Hercules faced tests of strength, value, and resistance, and although his feats made him the greatest hero of mythology, the reality was that he could never escape the destiny assigned to him: mortality. As much as his physical strength and his ability to overcome monsters and supernatural challenges made him seem invincible, Hercules never ceased to be aware of his finitude. Each battle, every victory, reminded him of how limited he was compared to the gods, and although in many occasions he felt superior, there always was that feeling of uncertainty about his true nature. That contradiction between the divinity that gave him power and humanity that made him susceptible to pain and death, led him to seek a way of transcending, of reaching something beyond the limits imposed by his mortality. The desire for immortality was not only a selfish ambition, but a deep need to find a greater meaning than the life of a man could offer. Despite their achievements and status as a hero, Hercules was not immune to suffering, or pain that caused the loss of loved ones. In many moments of his life, he was tormented by guilt, anger, and sadness, especially after the darkest episodes, such as the murder of his wife Megara and his children, induced by the madness sent by Hera. These moments of despair and anguish pushed him even more towards the search for something that would release him from the emotional and physical burden that led to being deadly. His desire to transcend led him to do the 12 works, not only as a form of redemption for his past mistakes, but as a search for recognition, to achieve something that was beyond what the gods had determined for him. Throughout these works, Hercules not only fought against monsters and challenges, he fought against his own destiny, trying to show that, although born of a mortal mother, he could be as great as the gods themselves. The culmination of his desire for immortality came when, at the end of his life, he was received on Mount Olympus, the home of the gods. Death did not reach him in a heroic way, but through the poison of Niso, whose effect led him to unbearable agony. In his last moments, when his body no longer supported more suffering, Hercules was elevated to heaven, where he was finally received by Zeus and the other gods. There, his duality was resolved. The semi-heavy that had lived between two worlds, the mortal and the divine, found his place among the gods. Immortality, which had sought all his life, was finally granted. This final act of his life, when he was received among the gods, symbolizes the culmination of his desire to transcend. However, the true importance of Hercules did not live only in or ascent to Olympus, but in what it represented for mortals. Although it reached immortality, Hercules never ceased to be the hero who, through his evidence and sufferings, became a model of courage, sacrifice, and resilience. His legacy lasted long after his death, and his story was told again and again, not only as a story of strength, but as an example of how even the greatest heroes fight with their own internal demons. Hercules, in his search for immortality, understood that true greatness is not to escape death, but in how life is lived, with all its imperfections, sufferings, and conquests. His duality, that struggle between mortality and immortality, made it human, and was precisely that humanity that allowed its history to be so powerful and moving. His ascent to Olympus was only the final recognition of his enormous sacrifice and everything he represented in the Greek culture, the hero who, despite his divinity, never ceased to be human in his essence. The death of Hercules, the great hero semi-war, is wrapped in a mantle of tragedy, sacrifice, and transcendence. It was an end as dramatic as his life, a last act of redemption that marked the closure of an existence full of impossible and painful tests, both physical and emotional. The story of his death is not only the end of his life, but the last sacrifice of a man who, although divine, never ceased to be vulnerable, fighting a destiny that, finally, reached it. The pain that Hercules suffered during his last days was not physical, but something much deeper. Nesos's poison, the centaur who had been responsible for his agony, continued to run his body. Poison blood, which had been applied to his robe by his wife Deianira, not only caused unbearable suffering, but also condemned him to a slow and cruel death. The poison extended by his body, causing his enormous strength and resistance to be useless against the pain that devoured him. Hercules, who had faced monsters, gods, and suffering, was finally impotent at a destiny that could not change. Desperate to end his suffering, Hercules, knowing that his time on Earth had come to an end, decided to resort to the last possible option, auto-immocation. On Mount Eta, surrounded by the mountains that had witnessed so many of their exploits, Hercules prepared to end his life by his own hand. However, auto-immolation was not only a way to escape physical pain, but an act of sacrifice. Hercules, knowing that his destiny was to die, not only accepted death, but chose the sacrifice so that his soul could find peace and liberation. With a heavy but determined heart, Hercules turned on a bonfire. Burning wood represented its last sacrifice, not only as a man, but as a hero. He knew that this act of auto-immocation would purify him, that only through suffering and death could finally find his redemption. This was the last act of a man who had spent his whole life dealing with the shadows of guilt, pain and guilt, and who, in the end, found peace only through his sacrifice. Hercules, at his last moment, offered the gods, seeking not only the liberation of his body, but also a way of transcending the mortality that had tormented him all his life. However, divine intervention was what really made the difference between the tragic end and immortality. While the flames consumed their mortal body, the gods of Olympus, who had always been a distant but important presence in their life, intervened to ensure that Hercules did not succumb to oblivion. Zeus, his father, looking from heaven, decided that Hercules' sacrifice deserved a much larger destiny than the simple death of a mortal. It was then that the divine intervention transformed what seemed to be a bleak ending into an act of glorification. Just when life escaped, Hercules was taken to immortality. The gods, with Zeus's approval, decided that Hercules deserved a place among them. His body, which burned in the flames of auto-immoking, was transformed. Death no longer claimed it. The gods raised him and received him on Mount Olympus, where he finally met with his father, Zeus. From that moment on, Hercules ceased to be a deadly half-lynx to become an immortal god. His soul, freed from the torments of earthly life, became part of the divine kingdom. In immortality, Hercules no longer suffered. He no longer felt the weight of the poison or the burden of guilt he had dragged throughout his life. Now, in Olympus, it was free from the chains of mortality. His earthly pain and suffering were left behind, and his place in heaven was secured by his sacrifice and his nobility. The gods received it with honors, and Hercules became part of the heavenly court, not as a simple mortal, but as an eternal being, a hero who had reached peace. The death of Hercules, therefore, is one of the most moving stories of Greek mythology. Not only because it marked the end of a life full of suffering and sacrifice, but because the sacrifice of a mortal half-time was rewarded with immortality. In his auto-immocation, Hercules not only accepted death, but also transcended through his suffering, becoming a venerated and remembered god forever. This act of final sacrifice was not only the closure of his life, but the culmination of his search for redemption and peace. The moment of Hercules' apotheosis, its ascent to Olympus, is one of the most powerful and significant events of Greek mythology. After a life marked by suffering, the struggle and the constant battle against his destiny, the hero Semio finally reached peace, not in death, but in divine glory. The image of Hercules ascending to heaven, surrounded by the hands of the gods who welcomed him in his heavenly kingdom, marks the culmination of his extraordinary existence. The apotheosis of Hercules was not simply a recognition of its strength and its exploits, but an act of divine justice. Throughout his life, the son of Zeus and Alcmena had suffered not only at the hands of monsters and enemies, but also under the weight of the envy and anger of the gods, especially from Hera, Zeus's jealous wife. His suffering was great, from the works imposed by Eurystheus, to the darkest moments of his life, such as the murder of his wife and children, caused by madness that Hera had sent about him. But despite all these obstacles, Hercules never let pain and despair defeat him. Each test he faced, every sacrifice he did not only strengthened him physically, but forged his character in the fire of adversity. At the time of his death, while his mortal body burned in the flames of Monte Eta, Hercules' sacrifice did not go unnoticed by the gods. It was at that time when Zeus, his father, decided that the hero who had suffered so much and that he had served humanity with courage and sacrifice, deserved a divine reward. With a gesture of justice and honor, the gods elevated him to Olympus, not as a simple demigod, but as one of them, an immortal god who finally reached the glory that corresponded to him. But the rise of Hercules to Olympus was not only a personal victory, but also a reconciliation with the gods who had made him suffer. His relationship with Hera, always marked by hatred and jealousy, reached a resolution at this momentous. Hera, who had persecuted Hercules with an excessive anger since her birth, saw him finally not as a threat, but as an equal. Although the goddess never ceased to be Zeus's jealous wife, in the Olympus, where the old disputes were no longer a place, Hera accepted Hercules as part of the divine family. Reconciliation was not forced or superficial, it was the recognition that, despite the difficulties and evidence, Hercules had tried his worth beyond any doubt. Now, instead among the gods, it was no longer Zeus's bastard son, but an integral member of the divine pantheon. The scene of its apotheosis is one of glory and dignity, a vision of Hercules surrounded by benevolent and cozy gods, finally free from the suffering of their earthly life. Zeus, with his wisdom and power, receives it with open arms, and the hero, who always fought to find his place between mortals and immortals, is finally in the position that corresponds to him among the gods. His pain and sacrifice were left behind, and now, as an immortal god, Hercules can rest in Olympus, accompanied by other heroes and mythical figures. What distinguishes the apotheosis of Hercules from other mythological stories is the deep humanity of the hero. While many heroes or demigods in Greek mythology achieve immortality due to their courage or extraordinary skills, the rise of Hercules is based on their ability to resist despair, guilt, and pain. Hercules not only won his place among the gods by his strength or his exploits, but for his indomitable heart and his ability to overcome the darkest difficulties that life presented him. His life was a constant struggle, not only against monsters and enemies, but also against his own internal demons. Hercules' apotheosis is the recognition of their resilience and humanity, a reminder that, even those who have suffered the greatest tragedies, can find redemption and peace. The reconciliation of Hercules with Hera, in this context, is significant. Although Hera represented anger and shipping Idea that persecuted him, his final acceptance of Hercules shows the ability of the gods to recognize greatness beyond the grudges and disputes of the past. In Olympus, there is no place for old grudges. The gods, by welcoming Hercules, symbolize divine justice. The suffering of the hero was recognized and rewarded, and, in the end, his place in the sky was assured. Thus, Hercules became one of the few mortals who reached divinity, and his ascent to Olympus became a symbol of hope and redemption. Hercules' apotheosis not only celebrated his life as a hero, but also highlighted the importance of sacrifice, perseverance, and the ability to overcome adversities. Through his ascension, Hercules became a model not only of physical strength, but of emotional and spiritual strength, an example that, even in the darkest moments, there is a possibility of reaching light, peace, and eternity. The cultural legacy of Hercules is vast and deep, extending far beyond the borders of Greek mythology. Over the centuries, his figure has left an indelible mark on literature, art, and philosophy, becoming a symbol of struggle, sacrifice, and redemption. The hero who faced the most extraordinary challenges, surpassing monsters, gods, and their own weaknesses, remains a source of inspiration and reflection in various disciplines, both in the ancient and modern world. In Greek literature, Hercules was a fundamental figure. The stories of his 12 works were not only stories of adventures and epic battles, but also represented the evidence that every human being must face in his life: suffering, guilt, redemption, and the search for glory. Poets and playwrights such as Euripides, Sophocles, and Aeschylus approached the figure of Hercules in their works, exploring both their heroic and human aspects. In works such as Heracles by Euripides, the hero is portrayed facing personal tragedy, being a victim of madness induced by Hera, an element that deepens his character and internal struggle. Through these literary representations, Hercules becomes a mirror of human passions and dilemmas, something that attracts readers of all times. Hercules also occupied a preeminent place in Greek art. Sculptors, painters, and ceramists were inspired by their figure to create some of the most famous works in ancient Greece. The scenes of his works were represented in glasses and murals, and his figure was immortalized in statues that celebrated their physical strength and role as a protector of humanity. However, Greek art not only focused on its skill in the struggle, but also on the most intimate and tragic moments of its life. The representation of Hercules was not only that of an invincible hero, but also that of a being who suffered, who fought against his own demons, who faced pain and guilt. This duality of its character was key to its cultural impact, showing that even the greatest heroes have their vulnerabilities. In philosophy, Hercules played a crucial role as a symbol of virtue, effort, and fight against adversity. Philosophers like Aristotle and Plato used Hercules as an example in their teachings about ethics and morals. The figure of Hercules represented the search for excellence, the ideal of man who fights not only against external forces, but also against his own defects and weaknesses. In the Ethics to Nicomachus of Aristotle, it refers to the mythological heroes as models of virtue, and Hercules, with their countless sacrifices and sufferings, exemplified the importance of perseverance and self-discipline in the achievement of good. Through his legacy, Hercules also taught the importance of redemption. Although, in his life, he was constantly persecuted for his mistakes and sufferings, at the end of his journey, his apotheosis and his ascent to Olympus reflect the idea that true heroism is not in perfection, but in the ability to overcome the tests, learn from mistakes, and find inner peace. This vision of Hercules as a non-perfect, but human and vulnerable hero made his figure transcend mere mythology and acquire a deeper meaning that remains relevant today. The cultural impact of Hercules also extends to universal literature, where his figure has been reinterpreted and adapted by innumerable writers, poets, and artists over the centuries. From the Middle Ages to the contemporary era, Hercules has been a source of inspiration for literary works, from tragedies to comedies. In modern literature, the figure of the tragic hero or the fallen hero finds his reflection on characters such as Hercules. Its history has influenced not only the heroic genre, without or also in the stories of superheroes and modern figures that face great challenges, often internal, to achieve their destiny. In addition, the influence of Hercules extends to philosophy and psychology. Modern philosophers and psychologists have found in their figure a model to reflect on the internal struggle of the human being. The work that Hercules performs, both literally and symbolically, is seen as a representation of the individual's constant struggle to achieve perfection and personal improvement. The works of Hercules, in many cases, are interpreted as psychological and emotional challenges that every human being faces throughout his life. The hero who fights not only against external monsters, but also against his own limitations and desires, remains a symbol of the personal growth process. In cinema and television, Hercules remains a central figure, both in versions more faithful to mythology and in modern adaptations. The figure of the hero, who struggles to redeem himself and find his place in the world, is still popular in popular culture. Movies, series, and comics have borrowed the name and features of Hercules, showing how their legacy is still alive and evolves over time. In conclusion, Hercules' cultural impact is incalculable. From ancient times to the contemporary era, its figure has been a source of inspiration in literature, art, philosophy, and psychology, and remains a powerful symbol of struggle, sacrifice, and transcendence. Through the centuries, Hercules has taught generations about the importance of facing the challenges of life with courage, perseverance, and humility. His legacy is still alive, reminding us that true strength not only lies in physical power, but also in the ability to overcome the hardest evidence that life puts on our way. The figure of Hercules not only had a deep impact on Greek mythology and culture, but also left an indelible brand in historical heroes that, although they lived in very different times, were reflected in the archetype of the heroic half. A remarkable example is Alexander the Great, the king of Macedonia, whose life and legacy show a clear influence of the figure of Hercules, both in his achievements and in his way of conceiving power and destiny. Alexander the Great, known for his vast empire that extended from Greece to India, was not only considered a brilliant military leader, but also cultivated the image of a half-hero, very much in the style of the great mythical heroes as Hercules. From a young age, Alejandro was educated under the influence of Aristotle, who taught him about Greek culture and mythology, including the stories of the gods and heroes of the past. As part of this learning, Alejandro is likely to feel particularly attracted to the figure of Hercules, who, despite his mortality, reached divinity through his heroic feats. Alejandro's link with Hercules went beyond a simple admiration. Alejandro himself considered Hercules descendant by his father, Philip II of Macedonia, who had claimed to be the son of the god Zeus. In some versions of history, it is mentioned that the dynasty of the Argening, to which Alejandro belonged, had mythological roots that went back to Hercules. This mythological lineage strengthened the idea that Alejandro was not only a great earthly leader, but, inside, he carried the spark of divinity. In this way, the Macedonian king sought to model himself as the heir of the mythological heroes, especially Hercules, whose value and strength were qualities that Alejandro wanted to emulate in his own life. Alejandro's identification with Hercules is also reflected in his military campaigns and in the way he presented himself before his army and his subjects. Like Hercules, who went through titanic tests that tested not only their physical strength, but their emotional and spiritual resistance, Alejandro also faced titanic challenges in his career. From his conquest of Persia to his campaigns in India, Alejandro showed an ability to fight and perseverance that many considered superhuman. However, as Hercules, he also suffered, facing huge losses, personal sacrifices, and the constant pressure of maintaining his power and dominion over vast territories. In a symbolic aspect, Alejandro's works remember Hercules' works. Just as Hercules faced monsters and obstacles on his way to divinity, Alejandro was faced with whole empires and cultures. Each of its victories, either on the battlefield or in diplomacy, could be seen as a work that consolidated its image of Semi's hero. In addition, like Hercules, Alejandro was not only admired for his courage in war, if not also because of its ability to overcome the hardest evidence and internal doubts, as evidenced by its struggle to maintain the unity of its empire and its desire to continue the expansion, even when many of their soldiers were exhausted by the long campaigns. As for aesthetics and iconography, Alejandro also adopted the image of Hercules in his visual representation. During his reign, coins began to be coined that showed him with a beard of Hercules, with the intention of associating it with the mythological hero and with the image of an unbeatable half. In addition, some historical stories mention that Alejandro dressed in the skin of the lion of Nemea, similar to the one Hercules used as a symbol of his victory over the beast, which reinforced his connection with the mythical hero. This visual representation not only sought to highlight its strength, but also its connection with myths and divine power. Throughout his life, Alejandro also adopted some of the virtues that Hercules symbolized. The Greek demigod was not only known for his physical power, but also for his tireless desire to fulfill the tasks entrusted to him, regardless of what cost him. In the case of Alexander, his tireless desire for conquest and expanding his empire, as well as his constant search for glory, somehow reflect the same heroic impulse that moved Hercules on his journey towards redemption. However, it is also important to note that, like Hercules, Alejandro was not immune to tragedy or the consequences of his own acts. Despite his victories and his invincible image, Alejandro's story is also marked by moments of deep personal anguish, such as his growing paranoia, his tensions with his own men, and the eventual decline of his empire after his premature death. In many ways, the tragedy of Hercules, which implied constant suffering and the challenge to divinity, can be reflected in Alejandro's life, who, despite his achievements, never found true peace or lasting stability. In summary, Hercules' influence on Alexander the Great is deep and multifaceted. From his conception as a descendant of Hercules to his emulation of the mythological hero in his campaigns, Alejandro saw himself as an heir of the great heroes of ancient Greece. His life, full of conquests, internal struggles, and moments of glory, is marked by the same duality that defined Hercules, that of a man capable of reaching great heights, but also a human being who must face the shadows of his own nature. The legacy of Hercules, therefore, not only resonated in the world of mythology, but also influenced the way in which the great historical leaders, such as Alexander the Great, saw themselves and presented themselves to the world. The myth of Hercules has transcended the centuries, adapting to the different times and contexts. From its origin in Greek mythology to modern representations in literature, cinema, and popular culture, the semi-hero has evolved, but its essence, the fight against adversities, remains universal. The modern interpretations of Hercules have allowed their figure to remain relevant and attractive for new generations, adapting to different forms of expression and entertainment. In contemporary literature, Hercules has been reinterpreted on multiple occasions, both in the form of rehearsals and in fantasy and science fiction novels. In many of these texts, the figure of the hero is explored from a more human perspective, showing its vulnerability and the internal dilemmas it faces, not only in the fight against monsters, but also in its own character. For example, in works of fantastic literature and in comics, Hercules is presented not only as an extraordinary being, but also as someone who fights with their identity and its purpose. The modern approach in its defects, fears, and errors makes the hero of internal and external conflicts. In the cinema, the figure of Hercules has been reinterpreted in various forms, from the most faithful versions to classical mythology to the freest and modern representations. Disney's animated film, Hercules, 1997, is one of the best-known and popular examples of this modern adaptation. In this version, a lighter and more accessible vision of the myth is offered, aimed at a younger audience. The character of Hercules presents himself as a young man who seeks to find his purpose, away from the darkest aspects of Greek mythology, and becomes a more friendly and accessible hero. Through its humor and its search for acceptance, the film presents universal themes such as identity and the desire for belonging, with a touch of magic and fantasy that allows the myth to connect with contemporary audiences. However, cinema has also presented more serious and dramatic versions of the myth, such as the film Hercules, 2014, starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. In this interpretation, the hero is a warrior hardened by suffering and battles, who deals with the scars of his past exploits and seeks to find a purpose beyond violence. In this approach, the complexity of the figure of Hercules is rescued, showing it as a human being who must face his own past, like many modern heroes in the cinema. Through his struggle to redeem his soul, this version moves away from the cartoon of the invincible hero and explores the internal struggle of the protagonist, a recurring theme in contemporary cinema. In pop culture, Hercules has been a recurring character in comics, video games, and television series, where he is often presented as a superhero or an anti-hero with supernatural characteristics. In comics, especially in the Marvel Universe, Hercules appears as one of the many gods of Olympus that interacts with other heroes and villains in a modern context. His figure in these comics not only remains that of a being endowed with great force, but also explores their relationships with other mythological characters and their adjustment to a contemporary world. Through these representations, comics creators manage to show Hercules as a multidimensional hero who, although he has physical strength to overcome any opponent, also faces the emotional and psychological complexities that define modern heroes. In video games, Hercules has also been a playable character several times, especially in titles that explore fantastic mythologies and worlds. In these games, players can embody Hercules, facing monsters and overcoming tests, which allows them to interactively experiment the character's heroic struggle. In doing so, the myth of Hercules adapts to a medium in which the player is the protagonist of his own adventures, allowing the most universal aspects of mythology to integrate into the context of action and adventure. One of the most interesting aspects of the modern interpretations of Hercules is how, over the years, it has adapted to the problems and concerns of each era. In the first representations of the myth, Hercules was the idealized hero, which exceeded any physical and moral challenge. However, the modern versions of myth, largely influenced by psychology, philosophy, and contemporary social struggles, tend to focus more on their internal struggles, in their search for identity and redemption. This vision of Hercules reflects the transition of a mythical and unpolluted hero to a much more complex and close character, whose problems are as human as those of anyone. In addition, the modern representations of the myth have allowed the character of Hercules to become a symbol of personal overcoming, of confrontation against the internal fears and demons. In many cases, his fight is not only against external monsters, but against his own nature and his destiny. This approach has allowed the myth of Hercules to remain relevant, especially in times when the narratives of superheroes and heroic figures are more focused on internal conflicts and personal dilemmas, instead of in physical feats. The impact of Hercules on pop culture also reflects a universal human desire to transcend, to become something bigger than life itself. Through their stories, modern find comfort in the idea that, although the fate of a hero is marked by struggle, overcoming and constant struggle, in the end there is the possibility of redemption and glory, as happened with apotheosis of Hercules in Olympus. In a contemporary world full of uncertainties and challenges, the figure of the hero who faces his internal demons and triumphs remains a source of hope and strength. In summary, the myth of Hercules has endured and evolved in literature, cinema, and popular culture due to its ability to adapt to modern times. From the comics to video games and films, the mythological hero remains an emblematic figure that symbolizes the struggle, perseverance, and redemption. Through their modern representations, Hercules continues to inspire those who seek in their history a reflection of their own internal battles and their desire to transcend. The myth of Hercules, with all their struggles, victories, failures, and redemptions, remains a powerful reflection of human nature. Throughout the centuries, this hero's archetype has transcended Greek mythology to become a universal symbol of the fight against adversities, personal overcoming, and the desire to transcend the limits imposed by life and destiny. From its divine birth to its ascension to Olympus, Hercules personifies the tireless search for excellence, but also the inevitability of facing one's dark and vulnerability. The myth of Hercules, far from being a simple narration of physical feats, is a testimony of deeper human emotions, the fight against guilt, pain, revenge, and, above all, redemption. Each of his works, each defeated monster, each challenge overcome, reflects the internal battles that we all face at some point in our lives. In this sense, Hercules is more than a hero of ancient mythology, it is a mirror of our own existential experience, a reminder that, although the difficulties of life may seem insurmountable, there is a greater purpose in the fight itself. The universality of myth lies in its ability to resonate with the deepest aspects of human nature. Each culture, each generation, has found in it something that reflects its own values, fears, and desires. At present, either through films, books, or comics, Hercules remains a figure capable of inspiring, because in its struggle to fulfill its destiny, we also find a metaphor of our own struggles to fulfill our dreams, face our fears, and finding a meaning in a world that often seems uncertain. Today, more than ever, the stories of heroes such as Hercules are vital because they offer us a way to understand how, through effort, perseverance, and reflection on our own mistakes, we can find the strength to move forward. Humanity, with all its challenges and difficulties, is reflected in the semi-discharge that is not invulnerable, that does not have all the answers, but that, despite its falls, continues to fight to find its redemption. Hercules is, therefore, an eternal hero, because it embodies the human struggle that never ceases, the struggle to be better, to understand ourselves, and to achieve inner peace. In each of us, in our little and great daily battles, the essence of Hercules is still alive.